ironically enough, this thing that not enough people are paying attention to is far more significant for our future. We're going to do the oval back and forth, all up and down, because there's a lot to talk about here with the Bukele meeting, where Donald Trump went nutty mode with President Bukele of El Salvador. As you guys know, Nayib Bukele is probably the worst Palestinian descent person out there, like literally one of the worst, if not the worst. I would say it's like him and son of Hamas, like honorary, no longer Palestinians. Like people get mad at like DJ Khaled for not really saying anything about Palestine or doing much about Palestine, but like this guy straight up is the worst. Like it's him, Richard Hanania, but he is the worst, I think. As far as like Nayib Bukele goes, he started off relatively progressive, focusing on like rehabilitation over incarceration, and then very quickly became like a cryptocurrency guy who was willing to use El Salvador for Western interests, billionaires, things like that. He is a horrible, monstrous piece. He set up the Cecot facility for anti-terrorism. And since then, there's speculation that he also worked with some of the MS-13 leadership and simultaneously decided to go on this like massive surveillance regime, massive police state regime, where his goons will go up to any street vendor or any village in the middle of the night and just black bag people and do dragnets and then claim that they're all MS-13. And then, 300 people at a time will go and sit in front of a judge who's wearing a balaclava and decide that they're all MS-13, all 300 of them. And then they get disappeared into Cecot, where they're tortured. No due process, no care or consideration for human rights. It's truly terrifying. No, it's not like America. It's beyond America, okay? It's a little bit worse. Our American prison system is pretty bad. But at least the things that happen in the buildup to the American prison system there's some semblance of logic and some semblance of order. Yeah, they arrested like 2% of the population. Is beyond USA. Salvi here. I still can't believe how brainwashed he's got former FMLN members to vote for him. I have friends whose parents flew home to vote for him. Yeah, a lot of the Salvadorans they like him. In Latin America, I feel like there's a which way Western man moment, and all the reactionary right wingers, they like Bukele, and all of the leftist, socialist adjacent the Latin American countries are not too fond of him. So FMLN is the leftist party of El Salvador. I know, but I'm saying that like he's been able to win a lot of favor amongst all Salvadorans. They're not even deporting. They're sending people to concentration camps. These people can't even just go live in another country. Yeah, that's the other side of this. It is pretty terrifying. And yeah, I mean, that's the brief little background on Nayib Bukele, right? That's the brief background on Nayib Bukele. Very far right, very reactionary. Interestingly enough, Donald Trump used to Bukele a lot and would claim that like Nayib Bukele was also dumping his asylum, dumping his own MS-13 gang members directly into the United States of America. But I guess they've patched that up. They've patched their relationship seemingly as he is using the Cecot facility as a slave labor concentration camp that we have outsourced to El Salvador. Truly horrifying stuff that's taking place here. Yeah, this is the especially horrifying part of this. Before the pool entered, this exchange was captured on the El Salvador government's live stream. Trump endorses sending homegrown U.S. prisoners to El Salvador, meaning American citizens to notorious foreign prisons.
People wanted to change their weapons, and they wanted. He demanded, they love you. They love what you do. I'm not your support. I want him to do, for homegrown criminals next. Yeah. They said homegrown, is annexed. The homegrown's built. You got to build about 5 more places.
Yeah, we've got space.
All right.
He says the homegrown ones are next. You guys built about 5 more spaces. He goes, yeah, we got space. It's not a Twitter video issue. This is not supposed to be live, chat. This is a hot mic. This is a hot mic, okay? This is not, we were not supposed to hear this. Before, as Jonathan Lemire, co-host of the Morning Show, says, this is before the pool entered. This exchange was captured on the El Salvador government's live stream. Trump endorses sending homegrown U.S. prisoners to El Salvador, meaning the American citizens to notorious foreign prisons. And it's not even just a hot mic. I believe this is something that the Trump administration has talked about already. It's something that Bukele has talked about already. So that's it. To be fair, he said it before. He said it shortly thereafter in the press pool too. Yeah. It's not something that they're hiding. Sure. Here's a question. Are you deporting America? Are you considered deporting American citizens to El Salvador? Trump says, yeah, that includes them. You think they're a special type of people or something?
Open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S.
People on Twitter are already defending it. We're so cooked. Yeah. I mean, they're Nazis. There's not really anything else I can say about that. That's it. It's here. It's happening. They're fascists. They're really for this kind of violence. They don't really consider that this kind of violence may actually impact them in the long run. I don't know. This is every single day that goes by. Like, I joke about it being Burger Reich or whatever, but like, it's not really a joke. These guys are actually straightforward, blood-curdling fascists. They are baying for blood. They want it. They're excited at the prospect for this kind of structure to become legally calcified. They want to test the boundaries. They're testing the boundaries right now in terms of like what they can get away with. They've already eradicated any sort of mechanism of pushback. There's not a lot of work you can get. Like, one of the most important and yet like somewhat quiet actions that the Trump administration took was against law firms. Okay. And we obviously covered it here, but there wasn't like that much anger or resentment towards this, partially because it's like there's outrage fatigue. It's impossible to pay attention to all the things that they're doing. But the reason why it was very significant, the reason why Donald Trump's attacks against law firms was very significant is because they basically came in and said, if you don't do pro bono work for us, we won't let you into federal buildings. And if you can't go into a federal building, you can't practice law. Like, you can't talk to your clients. Like, they basically said, you have to, you can't go against us. There are very few law firms that are still capable or interested in fighting back against them. Against this government. But why send criminals to another country? I thought our prisons were for profit and want as many as possible. I think that the Cecot alignment is going to work where Eric Prince, from what I've read, Eric Prince Academy, right? Like private mercenaries are going to take over some of the logistics from the Department of Homeland Security. That's number one. Number two, they're most likely going to do a joint partnership with American corporations, I suspect, like American private prison corporations, where they can open up these facilities or manage these facilities, these concentration camps, for pennies on the dollar, as opposed to having them operate on U.S. soil, where there are at least some kind of constitutional hurdles that they have to avoid. So I suspect that they will utilize they'll utilize El Salvador, purchase the land, engage in a land lease agreement with the Salvadoran government, and it will still be like, American private prison corporations will make money off of this, I suspect. By sending them to another country, it becomes foreign policy too. That's what Trump has started saying. Yeah. There's a bunch of reasons as to why sending them to El Salvador is a benefit for a fascist administration like this, and we're seeing it. One of the benefits from their perspective is Well, we can't return them, even when the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, says you have to return this person. You were not supposed to send this person. This person is an active withdrawal, as in due process kicked in. He went through the court system. The American government literally cleared a higher, this person, this Maryland resident, cleared a higher standard of proof to get a withdrawal to El Salvador, as in the asylum application beyond that is easier to prove. It is harder to prove a withdrawal to El Salvador than it is to get an asylum application through. Okay? That's precisely the reason why the Supreme Court gave a unanimous decision on the facilitation of the return of this, or withdrawal, withholding, sorry. There are different mechanisms to defend yourself against, like, deportation. A withholding of removal to El Salvador, which is where he's from, is a de facto harder to prove in courts than getting an asylum application done. And it means de facto that, like, you're not supposed to remove this person. You're not supposed to deport this person. Or even if this person was to, I don't know, do something heinous, right? Like a deportable crime, they would not be able to deport him to El Salvador. They would deport him somewhere else. But this person never did that, for the record. He's not a part of any gang. He has, as far as I understand, there's no crime that he's committed. And yet, the actual crime that was committed in this process was done by the government, which then admitted to the wrongdoing. Anyway, let's continue with this, and then we'll do...
U.S. citizens fully naturalized American.
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have.
With a simple administrative error, the U.S. now has wholesale SCOTUS approval to illegally detain and deport any U.S. citizen that they want. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, Donald Trump is now entertaining the notion of kidnapping, black bagging, and shipping off American natural-born U.S. citizens to a different country. This is new. This is new territory. A lot of the stuff that they're doing is new territory, for the record. Straw man argument too strong. It's not even a straw man. There is no straw man that he's engaging in. He just, like, made up a couple cases that are gruesome in his mind and said, yeah, we're going to ship those guys off to El Salvador. Okay, we're going to ship those guys off to the El Salvador torture slave facility. Aren't people just going to revolt if this admin goes full fascist like this? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so. Especially on this stuff. On the deportation stuff, I think a lot of people are utterly oblivious. They are utterly oblivious to the actions that this administration is taking. And I think on the Israel stuff, on the deportation stuff, which goes hand in hand, it is far more consequential than the trade wars, okay? And this isn't to say that, like, the tariffs and the exemptions are not consequential. It's far more consequential than the Doge cuts, which isn't to say that those Doge cuts aren't consequential. But this, ironically enough, this thing that not enough people are paying attention to is far more significant for our future. Because the reality of the matter is, you do the Doge cuts, people revolt, okay? People rise up. Let's say they fire every federal employee, right? And then the people go, what are you doing? You just fired every single person. How dare you? You start protesting in the street. His administration comes in and black bags key leadership in those protests, and they ship them off to El Salvador. Boom. All of a sudden, there's nothing. You can't do anything. There's no free speech anymore at this point. There's no due process anymore at this point. And when you get deported to the Cecot facility, you have no way of return. So it doesn't even matter. It is one of due process and First Amendment rights are the most consequential remaining the most consequential remaining protections that we have that they are actively destroying. And ironically, the sad state of affairs is that many of these people are either completely oblivious to this stuff. I've been ringing the alarm bells on this for quite a while now. And I think that most Americans are completely either A, oblivious to this, or B, perhaps even worse than being oblivious, the ones who are knowledgeable about what's going on here are in support of it. They are championing it. It's a truly terrifying predicament.
If the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You know, you have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
President Trump, thank you very much. How many illegal criminals are you planning?
Yeah. You said this. You said that if SCOTUS says someone needed to be returned, you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. Why don't you say, isn't it wonderful we're keeping criminals out of the country? Like, that's his reaction to this is, you are in violation of the Supreme Court orders here. But basically, the question is, Mr. President, you are directly in violation of the Supreme Court orders. What do you have to say about this? And his response is, it's great. It's great that we're keeping terrorists out of this country. By the way, for the record, there is no evidence whatsoever. There's only evidence to the contrary. Okay, of this wrongly deported U.S. man, this Maryland resident, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. There is no evidence whatsoever that he's in MS-13. There's only evidence to suggest that he is directly in the crosshairs of MS-13. And yet, and this is something that the federal government has also personally acknowledged. And yet they still, on the one hand, say he's MS-13, and then also on the other hand, say there's no way we can bring him back.
With you because you want to stop crime, and so do we. And it's very, very effective. And I want to just say hello to the people of El Salvador and say they have one hell of a president. Okay, and I mean that, and I know him well.
Mr. President, you have 350 million people to liberate. Yeah. But to liberate 350 million people, you have to imprison some. You know, that's the way it works, right? You cannot just, free the criminals and think crime is going to go down magically. You have to imprison them so you can liberate 350 million Americans that are asking for the end of crime and the end of terrorism. And it can be done. I mean, you're doing it already. And I'm sure that people have seen the change.
Why is he sucking Trump / America's boot? What do you mean? This is the dream for him. Everybody knows that if you want to have a permanent dictatorship till the end of time, you, especially in a Latin American country, you have to be America's dog. That's how you get all the benefits. You get money, you get political support. That's it. These are all of his wishes being realized in broad daylight in real time. Bukele has been able to generate a lot of goodwill, partially as a consequence of how violent MS-13 was, and how much people were, how much people just could not deal with the impact of MS-13's violence, and basically turned his police apparatus into a gang that is even more powerful than MS-13, partially while collaborating with MS-13, potentially collaborating with MS-13 as well. This is the suspicion that people have. Oh my God, you guys shit on Bukele way too much. Yeah, he's authoritarian, but you guys don't shit on Xi Jinping like this. Brother, what are you talking about? What kind of industrial policy has Nayib Bukele implemented in El Salvador? Like, what do you mean? He's just like a straightforward right-wing fascist. Like, that's it. His claim to fame here is basically building slave labor prisons and holding people unjustifiably in said slave labor prisons, like no due process whatsoever. Virtually every single humanitarian organization has been writing extensively about the Cecot facility and how horrifying it is. I think the horrifying aspect of Cecot in and of itself is obvious to everyone, right? You either get put into the slammer where you have no daylight, you don't see any light whatsoever, you're in pitch black darkness, isolated from everybody else, or when you're not, when you're in general population, you're under constant surveillance and constant light where you can't even sleep. Okay, sleep deprivation is the norm in these facilities. But outside of that, you have very little opportunity to speak with the outside world, very little opportunity to speak with your lawyers, and no way to combat an unjustifiable imprisonment. You don't have to sympathize with MS-13 in this process. You have to recognize that, one, these are torture facilities, okay? And two, more importantly than the fact that these are torture facilities, the people that are being put into these torture facilities, it's because Hasan can't relate. He never went when crime was rampant. Oh, yeah. He got rid of crime. I don't know. You think you understand how bad it was? Chatters, please, for the love of Christ and all things holy, listen to my words, okay? I'm explaining why people still believe in Bukele. And I'm also telling you how stupid it is to make the assumption that crime is gone now. It's done in El Salvador. It doesn't exist. When you got the government doing crime. What will it take for one of your family members to get black-bagged and falsely considered to be MS-13 for you to go, okay, maybe this wasn't the best idea? He imprisoned 2% of the population, dude. What are we talking about? I'm not saying the situation was better in the past. I'm not saying that at all. I'm simply stating that the heavy-handed nature of these apprehensions and the lack of due process and the torturous conditions within the facilities implies that the criminal leadership has exchanged hands. It went from MS-13 to Nayib Bukele. There's also suspicion that Bukele himself, in a deal not dissimilar to like previous deals that Mexican leadership have done with the cartels, most likely also cut a separate side deal with MS-13 as well, which is part of the reason why he wanted the American MS-13 leadership that was apprehended to be sent expeditiously to El Salvador before they were able to make public statements about the collaborative nature of MS-13 and Nayib Bukele. I feel like gang unity might arise because of such horrific treatment. I mean, there's not really much you can do. It's a concentration camp. Yeah. This is the size of El Salvador overlaid over Dallas, Texas. Why would we send anyone there besides nefarious reasons? Is Guantanamo, without having to talk to Cuba, it's ideal for Trump? Exactly. You think we don't have facilities to deal with this? Of course we do. It's just this way you get to wash your hands over the death camp happening on U.S. soil. Did you not see that I said only the worst are sent to Cecot and the rest focus on rehab? Cecot is the worst? No, you're wrong. You're just, I think you're delusional. You're absolutely wrong. No, it's not the worst of the worst that are sent to Cecot. What are you talking about? That's the entire problem here. No, it's random people, random street vendors, for example. It's whoever the police decide is MS-13, and there's no due process. That's kind of the whole problem here happening in America as well. You just make up. No, Nayib Bukele initially wanted to focus on rehabilitation, focus on solving the underlying economic problems where crime manifests. That's true. That is how Nayib Bukele actually rose to power, and then very quickly was like, yeah, all that. They literally grab people for tattoos, even if it's not MS-13 related tattoos. They grab people for being street vendors if they've been threatened by MS-13. It has nothing to do with actual MS-13 gang activity. The idea that it's like the most rugged of the MS-13 criminals that are being shipped into the facility is wrong. And that is just for the Salvadorans. Like, we're not even talking about the people that we've shipped over there. Okay? It's outlined in this article. El Salvador named one of the world's safest countries. At what cost? El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele declared an initial month-long state of emergency in March 2022 due to heightened gang violence and a wave of murders, according to the Human Rights United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. So far, the state of emergency has been renewed 30 times, the latest of which was announced by the Salvadoran Legislative Assembly on October 4th. To date, this tool has allowed 604 days without homicides and the arrest of more than 82,000 people linked to gangs. In addition, it has positioned the country among the safest in the world. The state of emergency suspended several Salvadoran rights and freedoms as per the OAS. 1. Right of assembly, freedom of association, right to be informed of the reasons for detention, inviolability of correspondence and telecommunications. Regardless, the entity does recognize a constant decrease in homicide cases, with the rate per 100,000 people going from 21.2 in 2020 to 4.9 in 2023. Okay? The alleged human rights violations. El Salvador has been called out for massive human rights violations, including thousands of arbitrary detentions and violations of due process, as well as torture and ill treatment, according to Amnesty International. In a report published on December 2023, the organization detailed a rise in systematic detentions, forced disappearances, and instances of torture since the introduction of the state of emergency. There's also suspicion that he most likely did a secret deal with MS-13 The other suspicion also is that the government is not correctly clocking the murders as well. They're just not reporting the murders potentially and the disappearances to artificially lower the murder rate as well. And it's been successful in terms of propaganda. It's been successful. The remaining Salvadoran population that isn't imprisoned love it. They love him and they love this. That's how terrifying the MS-13 crime situation was to begin with. Okay? So you're just going to speculate? No, there is plenty of evidence as to why there is a secret side deal that he... wait, hold on. Washington Post covered it as well. Bukele agreed to accept hundreds of suspected gang members living in the United States. In return, he wanted the U.S. to send him less than a dozen MS-13 gang members in U.S. custody. Why was he so intent on getting the MS-13 guys? Washington Post reports. Some Salvadoran analysts believe Bukele wants the gang leaders back so they won't testify about his government's involvement with them and potentially put him in legal trouble. If these returns of Salvadoran gang members continue, it takes away the possibility that the U.S. judicial system will open a case against Bukele for negotiations and agreements with terrorist groups, said Juan Martinez de Bucion, an anthropologist who has studied the gangs. Bukele has denied making deals with gangs. Such negotiations by his predecessors were highly unpopular domestically. A lot of ultra-conservative people and even non-conservative people in El Salvador like Bukele. They think he has been able to put a dent in the crime that MS-13 is engaged in. And to a certain degree, it has been successful. The problem here, however, is not that the incredible torture prison scheme that he has created is horrifying in and of itself. The issue also is that they're grabbing random people off the street with no due process. Like, what the heck are you talking about? Yeah, if you become the crime, if the government becomes the MS-13 gang, then yeah, technically there is no crime because it's a police state. Operational autonomy. Just curious, what kind of deal would he make with MS-13? What does MS-13 get? Yeah, this is similar to what narco politics looks like in Mexico as well, as the chatter correctly points out. Operational autonomy and legal immunity in some cases as long as they stay within government boundaries. Then why are his approval ratings so high? I don't know. Think about the United States of America. The United States of America is an even better analog to this because the rates of crime, specifically violent crime, are nowhere near as high as El Salvador. And yet the people were made to believe that there is like an undocumented migrant crime panic that has taken place in this country, and therefore are totally fine with these sorts of insane, unprecedented schemes that the Trump administration is engaging with right now. It's directly Hitlerian policy. And most people are either A, oblivious to it, or B, the ones who are aware of it are in support of it. So think about how that can happen. Try to analyze how that can happen in a country where there isn't the same level of crime. And then think about what it would look like, how bloodthirsty normal Americans would be like if there was that level of crime as well. The United States Department of State also recognizes the allegations in their El Salvador Human Rights Report in 2023, signaling arbitrary killings, cruel treatment by security forces, harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, and extensive gender-based violence as some of the barriers which have undermined President Bukele's security strategy. The Socorro Judicio Humanitario Foundation, which provides free legal advice to innocent Salvadorans criminalized by the state of emergency, has reported 315 deaths of incarcerated people since the establishment of the measure in 2022. The most prevalent causes of death signaled by the association are violence and lack of medical attention, although unknown causes of death have increased in 2024. These people only had the right to a hearing for the imposition of captivity measures, after which they died under the guardianship of the state. Amnesty International also explained that the widespread pattern of arbitrary arrest targets people from marginalized communities especially, which already suffer from crime and extreme poverty. The conditions that inmates experience within these prisons has also been heavily denounced by human rights organizations. As per the OAS, incarcerated individuals are stripped down to their underwear, placed in small cells where they sleep on the floor, and do not have access to clean water or food. So the torturous conditions are already inhumane and unacceptable. Even when they are torturing MS-13 gang members, by the way, just so you understand. But the major problem here on top of that is that it's not all MS-13 gang members. It's not all rugged criminals. It's just what the state has decided is a rugged criminal. Yeah, Salvadoran here who's been and is going again this year. Reason for Bukele's high popularity is because living conditions have improved. It's just that simple. So they see the improvement and think, well, it's working, and either don't care or see it as necessary. They've fallen for the propaganda. And for the record, we're talking about what's going on in El Salvador, but what's happening in El Salvador is no longer just about El Salvador, because we're sending Americans to this torture facility. Okay? And the reasons as to why we're doing that, the reasons as to why we're sending Americans or, legal permanent residents and potentially Americans down the line to this torture slave camp without due process, with no mechanisms to bring back these people, even if the Supreme Court demands that they bring back these people, is because we want to have an unaccountable torture slave labor colony that is not on U.S. soil, where we can just like ship enemies of the state to. And considering that the Trump administration is entertaining the notion of even drawings on a Tesla as an act of terror, that can mean anyone and everyone. It's very weird that a lot of people refuse to recognize how this will affect them down the line. It is shocking. Tip, don't blow up a car. Yeah, okay, man. Blowing up a car, by the way, is a crime. It's just totally separate from a crime that can get you as an American citizen to be black bagged and shipped without due process to a slave camp where you might die. Okay? What are you talking about? Like, what are we doing? What is this attitude? Just kill everyone then, That's This is the logical conclusion that so many dumb, mouth-breathing fascists come to, where it's just like, oh, you did a crime? Die! I'm gonna kill you. Like, that's what you're saying. No reason. I've just decided you've done a crime, and therefore, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna shoot you dead. And it's awesome that they're doing that. Like, you have no imagination on how this could one day harm you, okay? I don't do crime.
And
Dog. Normal daily activities that you engage in today could be considered a crime tomorrow. How is this difficult to understand? Also, it doesn't matter if you do a crime. If there's no due process, someone can just say you are doing a crime and black bag you anyway. That's the whole point of eroding due process. If there's no free speech, for example, and no due process, for example, these are two things that the Trump administration is eroding at this moment. Someone could just decide that they don't like the thought crime that you engaged in and black bag you. The only thing holding this entire structure together for you in your mind is the fantasy that it will never happen to you or a loved one. You don't actually need to do something. If there's no due process, someone could just claim that you did something and it's enough for you to get sent to the slave labor camp. Okay, do you understand the point, though? Do you understand how this is dangerous for everyone, including yourself?
It's just been absolutely phenomenal what a great leader can do. Clear direction, our laws matter. We should only have people in our country that love us, and the Border Patrol and our ICE officers and law enforcement officers have done fantastic work. So we're proud of them. Now we just need to get the criminals and murderers and rapists and dangerous gang members and terrorist organizations out of our country. So, Mr. President Bukele, we thank you very much for your partnership. It has been wonderful for us to be able to have somewhere to send the worst of the worst and someone to partner with.
This entire conversation is happening on the heels of a person who demonstrably is not the worst of the worst, that the American federal government has actively admitted was not the worst of the worst. The El Salvador president refusing to order the return of the wrongly deported U.S. man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, okay, despite a unanimous Supreme Court decision, 9-0 Supreme Court decision, in direct violation of the Supreme Court's orders, that the Trump administration is utilizing the language surrounding the Supreme Court's unanimous decision to their advantage, while also simultaneously saying that they have no interest in facilitating this anyway. The president of El Salvador said in a meeting with Donald Trump at the White House on Monday that he would not order the return of a Maryland man who was deported in error to a Salvadoran mega prison. The question is preposterous, Nayib Bukele said in the Oval Office on Monday, where he was welcomed by Trump and spoke with the president and members of his cabinet. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I'm not going to do it. This person is not a terrorist. This person is not even in MS-13. This person is in the crosshairs of MS-13. The American judiciary, the American justice system, found that this person was not only not MS-13, but also simultaneously in under threat from MS-13 if he were ever to be sent back to El Salvador. Okay? The government said, we cannot deport this person because you don't usually deport someone to another country in any case. But even if there was a situation where this person committed an act so vicious that they were deportable, they cannot be deported to El Salvador. Okay? He was in the process of going through his asylum application when he was black bagged and shipped away. And not only did all this happen, the federal government also admitted. They admitted that it was wrong. They engaged in an administrative error and falsely deported this person to El Salvador. He added, I don't have the power to return him to the United States, and said he would not release the man into El Salvador either. I'm not very fond of releasing terrorists into the country. The comments came a day after the Trump administration claimed that it is not legally obligated to secure the return of Abrego Garcia, despite the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that the administration should facilitate bringing him back. Lawyers for the Justice Department argued in court filings on Sunday that asking El Salvador to return Abrego Garcia from a notorious mega prison should be considered foreign relations and was therefore outside of the scope of the courts. How is the ruling enforceable? No ruling is technically enforceable. The judiciary has the power to persuade. That's it. Nothing else. The judiciary, the Supreme Court does not have any mechanism of enforcement beyond what it says goes. If the federal government refuses to follow through on the Supreme Court's decision, you create a constitutional crisis. That means the entirety of the judiciary is done. It's over. There's no power anymore. Yeah, the judiciary requires a buy-in from the executive and society at large. They have no enforcement mechanism. This is a true constitutional crisis in every sense of the term. Yes. So what's happening right now with Nayib Bukele is the Trump administration basically saying, what are you going to do about it?
We'd like to continue that partnership because it's been a powerful message of consequences. Mr. President, you wanted people to know that there was consequences if you break our laws and harm our people and endanger families. And this is a clear consequence for the worst of the worst, that we have somewhere to put them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we even had this gang member from Venezuela, one of the ones you sent, and we interviewed him just to get some information, etc. from them. And he said, oh, well, I got arrested 6 times, but they released me the 6 times, so I should be released again. And then we said, well, what's the last thing you do? And he said, well, I shot a cop in the leg, but I didn't kill him. I just shot him in the leg. And we're like, this guy was arrested 6 times here in the United States, 6 times. He was released 6 times, and in the he was released 5 times, and the last time he was sent to El Salvador, right? So he's not getting released. But the last time he shot a cop, actually, and he shot him in the leg. So these are, like you said, there's something broken.
It's the liberal establishment. But they're not running things anymore in this country, and we're run by, and I don't say conservative, I don't say anything, we're run by people with great common sense.
Yeah, common sense.
Yeah, that's not the point, is it? That's not who we're talking about right now, is it? Even that guy should still go through the criminal justice system here in the United States of America. If he shot an American cop, he needs to go to American prison. That's my attitude on this issue, but like sending him to El Salvador is insane. It doesn't make any sense. Having said that, however, the overwhelming majority of people that we've sent down to the Cecot facility so far are not even convicted of any sort of wrongdoing. They're not even accused of any sort of wrongdoing. The overwhelming majority have no criminal record whatsoever. They've been grabbed off the streets for erroneous claims with this like incredibly stupid, arbitrary point system that they've designed to be like, oh, you got a tattoo and you're brown? It's over. You're going to Cecot. It's not even about deporting them at this point back to their nation of origin. It's just straight up permanently jailing them in a slave camp. It is insane. Why should he get fed in American prisoners with taxpayer money? They're not even citizens. Oh my God, brother. Oh my God. Oh my God. How are we having this conversation over and over and over again every single time? Okay. The American criminal justice system has a higher standard until Donald Trump had a higher standard. Okay. The entire purpose is to make sure that justice is served. You understand? If an undocumented migrant shoots and kills, I doubt that. What do you mean you doubt that? Well, that's not an argument. Okay, never mind. You doubt it. Okay, well, I guess owned. If you or one of your loved ones was wronged by an undocumented migrant or a documented migrant or a U.S. citizen, you want the American courts to at the very least go through the process. and punish these people, convict them and charge them of the crimes and the wrongdoing that they engaged in. It's so stupid. I hate that because Americans are so vindictive and so insane when it comes to crime and punishment. We are just a nation of bloodthirsty fascists, okay?
Like we said, a decade ago or so, women rights movements were pressuring so that we enacted specific laws to avoid men abusing women. And I think those laws were great because there were a lot of men abusing women. But now some of the same people are trying to backtrack on that and actually trying to make new laws allowing men to abuse women in sports. So actually, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
It's crazy. You know, they have weightlifting records, right?
Yeah.
A woman gets up and sways. She's incredible.
Oh my God. They're talking about like trans athletes. I'm losing my mind, dude. This is such... Ugh. Championing this. We're like, this is great. This is awesome. Look at our brilliant president doing what's right, combating the real issues, you know? Trans athletes. Documented New York reports that one of the Venezuelans deported to El Salvador was a 19-year-old with no criminal record, no tattoos, and who wasn't even a target of the ICE operation, but ended up sent there anyway. An ICE agent even said he's not the one when arrested. Wilmer only found out his son had been detained after receiving a phone call on March 15th from his nephew, Luis, who lives with them. That morning was their last time together. They had gone around the corner to do their laundry. Later that day, Wilmer said his son met with a friend to get some help with some errands at the American Red Cross. He learned this from Louise, who looked at the situation from inside the apartment. When his son was on his way back, just steps from his home, ICE agents stopped him. The officers grabbed him and two other boys right at the entrance to our building. One said, no, he's not the one, like they were looking for someone else. But the other said, take him anyway. That moment marked the beginning of Wilmer's search for answers. Answers he's still waiting for. This is 19-year-old Merville Gutierrez, who was grabbed off the street in New York City days before he was sent to El Salvador. His family insists he has no connection to Tren de Aragua. He doesn't even have any tattoos. 19-year-old, take him anyway. This is Gestapo shit. This is stuff that we learned about in history books. Many of you in this community learned those lessons and are terrified. But some, I think, learned those lessons were like, why don't we do that here? It would be awesome to do that here. And that's why they're championing the doing of that here.
Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate.
This is insane to me. Like, the government openly at this point recognizes that they did the wrong thing. And a part of recognizing that this was an administrative error means recognizing the lower court decision, the immigration court decision, to offer this person protected status against deportation from the United States of America, specifically to El Salvador. And they just simply lie over and over again. In the court proceedings that took place, they found out that this person was not a part of MS-13, that the confidential informant that lied to the police that he was MS-13 claimed that he was in New York. This person had never been in New York. On top of that, he was able to prove that if he were to be sent back to El Salvador, his life would be in danger. This is precisely the reason why they got the protections. It's crazy. Why won't reporters fact check them? There is nothing you can do. There's not really much you can do in terms of fact checking. I mean, he also said that Zelensky started the war again. You know what I mean? He's just like lying about so many different things. I mean, look, here it is. The war between Russia and Ukraine is Biden's war, not mine. I just got here and for 4 years during my term had no problem in preventing it from happening. President Putin and everyone else respected your president. I had nothing to do with this war, but I'm working diligently to get the death and destruction to stop. If the 2020 presidential election was not rigged, And it was, in so many ways, that horrible war would have never happened. President Zelensky, crooked Joe Biden did an absolutely horrible job in allowing this travesty to begin. There were so many ways of preventing it from ever starting, but that is the past. Now we have to stop. Now we have to get it to stop and fast. So sad. Everything he says is incorrect. Everything. Everything he says is a lie. On every issue. Whether it be tariffs, saying that there's going to be exemptions, but no exemptions, saying that, like, Xi Jinping's going to call me any day now, and then being like, why won't Xi Jinping call me? Everything. He's just breaking everything. And it's not like things were great already.
Appellate Immigration Court ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
So will you return him?
And you are doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Miller, wait a minute. Can you just also respond to that question? Because, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant, because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, please?
Yes, gladly. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As 2 immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States.
That's not true. Every part of what he stated here is wrong. And I know Charlie Kirk posted this as like, oh, he really popped off on this one. He just fucking, I guess that it's cool. You can just lie about all this shit.
As a starting point. As 2 immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13.
That's not true. First of all, that is straight up not true.
When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States and had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then, by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue...
Oh, that's kidnapping. That's actually the kidnapping. It's not what we did. What we did was a legal enforcement that we recognized wasn't legal now, but returning that person would be the real kidnapping. Okay, kidnap him and return him then. Who are they talking about? Is this guy's name public? Yes. His name is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. His name is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's a Maryland resident with a wife and a child. He was a member of a union. It's so insane that they're acting like this is the sovereignty of El Salvador issue.
Was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful and its main components were reversed 9-0.
This is also an inversion of the truth once again. Here's Ed Whelan's statement on the matter. Outrageous misinterpretation of the Supreme Court ruling. The unanimous court ruled that the district court order properly requires the government to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. Yes, the court also stated that the intended scope of the term effectuate in the district court's order is, however, unclear and may exceed the district court's authority. And it told the district court to clarify its directive with due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. But one, due regard doesn't mean that the district court couldn't have any teeth to effectuate. And two, in any event, the district court dropped effectuate from its revised order, so this is all irrelevant. Duty to facilitate continues. As I've said, the Trump administration will probably be able to get away with its bad faith defiance of the court on this matter, but it's appalling that it thinks that anyone is stupid enough to believe that it is actually complying with the court's ruling. Or rather, reversing the court's actual ruling by saying, no, the Supreme Court actually is on our side. The unanimous decision is there to defend our our immigration enforcement action. It's not. It's the exact opposite. If it was in defense of your immigration enforcement action, you wouldn't be playing legalese semantics with the decision. You would just say, the decision is clear as day. The Supreme Court thinks what we did was totally permissible. Instead, you have to hyper-focus on what facilitate versus effectuate means. Facilitation doesn't mean that this is an enforceable action, for example. Like, that's what it... That's the entire point of contention here. If the unanimous Supreme Court decision was stating that the federal government has the power to do this, they would not have said the federal government has to facilitate a return of the Maryland resident immediately.
Unanimously.
What do they gain by keeping him there? A million different reasons. One, they stand firm and test out the boundaries of the Supreme Court. Two, they basically violate Supreme Court orders without triggering a constitutional crisis, which gives them more opportunity to do this down the line. Three, if he were to be returned, he talks about the horrifying nature of the prisons. You got, 60 Minutes doing you set a precedent. You set a scary precedent for the Trump administration that, like, some of the people that they are interested in unjustifiably sending over to the slave colony can be returned to U.S. soil. And on top of that, they talk about the horrifying conditions there and the horrifying mistreatment that they experience as a Maryland resident. All of a sudden, it destroys the secretive nature of these operations, because you don't want any microscope on this. Okay, you don't want any sort of attention being brought forward here. They're trying to basically start a process in which they have enough. Utilizing the pre-existing legal restrictions to their advantage to slowly but surely erode the last mechanisms of safety that would stop the administration from doing stuff like this, whether it be due process, whether it be, violating court orders. So if they were to actually return this person and he comes back, it's horrible propaganda against the administration. It ruins everything that they're trying to do. It makes them look weak. It sets a precedent that they have to abide by court. They have to abide by the authority of the courts. Why did they even admit they made a mistake? Also, was he really the only one? No, of course not. He's not the only person that was sent there under false pretense. He's the only one that a immigration attorney of the state accidentally admitted to the administrative error on. That attorney has also literally been fired, I think. I think they fired him, right? Like, Pam Bondi literally said, you're done, you're out. Why did you ever admit to this? That's the problem. Virtually all of the people, with the exception of like a handful, are actually sent to El Salvador under similar conditions. This one is the most egregious because there was a directive from the court to not send him to El Salvador. It's the tip of the iceberg.
Stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador who again is a member of MS-13, which is, I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan
But
to
the
ask for
Supreme
a
Court's
to get it
asking
back?
to.
And
that-
what was the ruling
that-
in the Supreme Court, Steve? Was it 9-0?
Yes, it was a 9-0
In our favor.
in our favor against the district court ruling.
That's not what happened. It's the exact opposite of what happened. That is
saying
incredible.
that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. As Pam said, the ruling solely stated that if this individual, at El Salvador's sole discretion, was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time.
Well,
No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
I asked
¿Usted lo
President
liberaría,
Bukele, what is
Presidente
can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm suppose you're not suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's
I mean,
always
how can I smuggle? How can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, I mean, the
But
question-
again, everyone is just saying he's a terrorist. He's not.
Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said
How long do we have to
that
answer
it must
this
be
question,
facilitated.
Tanya? Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that?
What's illegal?
Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You know, you have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
President Trump, thank you very much. How many illegal criminals are you planning on exporting to El Salvador? And President Bukele, how many are you willing to take from the U.S.?
As many as possible.
Yeah, why won't you cover the news in a way where it suits my propaganda purposes is a crazy way to redirect the question. It's not even redirection. It's just like, why don't you just feed my ego? That's crazy. Like, doing this while he's openly defying a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court and simultaneously, without evidence, with only evidence to prove the opposite that's readily available, claiming that the guy that they're defying the Supreme Court order for is actually a terrorist, and also admitting that they want to do this to American citizens as well. How does nobody understand how terrifying this is? It's not like they're sheltering you from the truth. They're saying this is the goal. This is the purpose. This is what they are moving in the direction of. And it seems like a lot of Americans are oblivious, and the ones who are not oblivious are actively fantasizing about this. I don't even know how you combat this. I truly don't know how you, I don't know what to do in this situation. This is just unprecedented territory. Yeah, meanwhile, the army is arriving at the southern border as they're gearing up potentially for an invasion. I don't even know what they're going to do there. This is openly defiant of the Supreme Court, which specifically upheld in a unanimous decision an order that requires the government to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador. Here it is. The order properly requires the government to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador. They just wrote it. Clear as day. Trump administration claims SCOTUS ruling doesn't compel it to actually seek illegally deported man's release from prison, only to let him into the U.S. if he manages to get out.
And I just asked the president, you know, it's this massive complex that he built, jail complex. I said, can you build some more of them, please? As many as we can get out of our country that were allowed in here by incompetent Joe Biden through open borders. Open borders. You probably hear open borders and you can't even understand it because nobody can understand. Nobody smart or with common sense can understand it. So we have millions of people that should not be in this country that are dangerous.
The only person that I've seen that is actively doing something about this is Van Hollen. Okay. Respect to Chris Van Hollen on this. Requests meeting with President Bukele to discuss the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Announces intent to travel to El Salvador this week if Abrego Garcia is not returned. U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland has requested a meeting with Nayib Bukele when he's in the United States. And if he is not returned, by the end of this week, he's going to go down to El Salvador. This is actually 100% something I am in support of 1,000,000%. As an American senator, you have a lot of opportunity to bring attention to issues, and putting yourself directly in the crosshairs is a fantastic way to do that. And I'm glad that there is at least someone out there that's willing to do this. Imagine if Booker did this for Mahmoud. Yeah, he would never in a million years do that, because Cory Booker is Israel's guy. Okay, that's the reality. But yes, that is the expectation from our senators. This is the right thing to do. This is the smart thing to do. I'm very happy that there's at least someone demonstrating the courage necessary. Partially because when you're an American senator and a country like El Salvador, let's say, denies you entry into the country, you're basically taking an action not just against an American senator, a member of the Democratic Party, but you're taking action against America. And I think that will have a profound impact on the way that this is treated in the media and the way that Americans will respond to this. It will create a situation where Americans who run off the notion that we're the number one country on the planet, with our citizens having extra rights in comparison to everybody else, will get mad at the Trump administration if the Trump administration doesn't turn around and defend an American senator. But can he actually get him out? Trump won't approve of this and won't care if they don't let him in. No, I'm saying that, let's say Senator Chris Van Hollen goes to, but this is a 2080 issue. Most Americans support that. No, they do not. No, they do not. You are crazy for just simply repeating something that Stephen Miller is saying. Americans don't know what they're in support of until it becomes an issue that is in front of their eyes. That's why I place a lot of importance on senators like this taking action against this, to put this in the forefront of American consciousness. Do you not understand how many times do we have to experience this until people recognize that something being considered a 2080 issue doesn't necessarily mean it will stay a 2080 issue? This is at the heart of my anger towards the Democratic Party in terms of immigration. No counter messaging on immigration has created an environment, a media landscape that is heavily dominated by right-wing lies on the issue. This is precisely the reason why Americans are either, like I said, oblivious to the actions that the Trump administration is taking, or at the very least entertain it or enjoy it and support it, the ones who are knowledgeable on the actions being taken to begin with. But that is only because they do not comprehend the full scope of what is happening. Yeah. Also ironic to say this exactly. These chatters don't realize that 2 years ago, Israel had 80% of American support. Yeah. Now it's become a 2080 issue in the other direction, at least in the Democratic Party. Now, this doesn't stop the Democrats from refusing to recognize the popular support towards Palestinian emancipation that is in their base, because, you know, their careers rely on them refusing to recognize it. But these kinds of actions, unironically, when paired up with the reality that every American can experience, every American can see, will quickly change the attitude. Look no further than the tariffs. Donald Trump ran on tariffs. He could say he won on tariffs. Look at the Americans' attitude towards tariffs now. Because once implemented, everybody realized, oh my God, this is going to have a horrible impact on both the stock market and also the price of goods. Please drop this. This is a 2080 issue nonsense. How dangerous the U.S. for tourists right now? Incredibly dangerous. straight up, I never thought I would say this, insanely dangerous. Because they don't just deny you entry into the country, okay, which they have already. That's a saving grace. You getting denial of entry into the country saves you, because we don't just deport anymore. We just send you to a slave labor prison and then actively say, we can't bring you back. Sorry, sucks to suck. Actually, do not come. If you think you have legal protections, let me tell you right now, you do not have any legal protections. And American citizens themselves will no longer have legal protections either. This has also obviously led to travel falling off of a cliff here. The U.S. Is one of the world's top travel spots, pulling in over 72 million visitors last year, generating 1.3 trillion. But lately, travel from Europe and Canada is down up to 35% thanks to Trump's talk and scary border stories. Trump is bankrupting the U.S. It's down 30% for most countries. 20 to 30%. They're also shut up seizing mobile devices of people they suspect just to look at contacts. They're doing this to American citizens too, by the way. They did this to an immigration lawyer. They literally sat him down and tried to go through his phone, and they said they knew he was an immigration lawyer. There's also the other side of the story where they're incredibly incompetent. They sent out a mass blast of emails to American citizens telling them to self-deport in 10 days. That also happened this past week. And it was so stupid that I initially thought it can't be real. There was an immigration attorney in the United States of America that revealed that her wife, who's also an American citizen, got a immigration enforcement email demanding that they self-deport in 7 days, saying that their saying that their legal permanent residency had been revoked. This person was not a legal permanent resident. They were a citizen. So not only is it horrifying, it's also incredibly stupid and incredibly incompetent as well. Yeah. How is this country going to host a World Cup is a real question. This is supposed to happen in a couple months. A well-respected MMA coach who always posts training tips and is based out of Australia says he arrived in the U.S. for an already scheduled seminar, but was detained at the border, thrown in a federal prison, and ultimately deported. Like, why'd you come here, dude? Oh, next year. Sorry, not this year. Next year. I don't even know how we get to next year at this stage. At this point, I don't know what next year looks like even. World Cup next year, Club World Cup is this summer. Yeah, there's a 2025 Cup in June and July, right? Are you afraid of being targeted by the Trump administration? Chatters, I am an American citizen. I was born here, okay? By the time the Trump administration decides to take illegal actions and enforcement against someone like myself, it's already over. I'm definitely on the list. Like, someone like myself would certainly be on the list with someone of my background, but I'm on the lower side of said list. Understand that many of you will have already been packed up by the time they get to someone like myself. I hope that we will at some point dial this back dramatically.
Are you considering additional sanctions against Russia after their latest attack? And do you have an update on the rate and when you might announce semiconductor
Well, I already
tariffs?
have sanctions on Russia. I put them there. If you remember, Nord Stream 2, that's the big pipeline that goes through Europe. I stopped it. That's Russia's pipeline, the largest pipeline, I think, in the world. Goes to Germany. And I stopped it. And when Biden came in...
Well, Biden blew it up, so... I mean, who took more significant action? One must ask.
Can I have an update today on potential semiconductor tariffs and potentially pharmaceuticals?
What?
Semiconductor tariffs and potentially pharmaceuticals?
Pharmaceuticals we're going to do. We don't make our own drugs. our own pharmaceuticals. We don't make our own drugs anymore. The drug companies are in Ireland and they're in lots of other places, China. And all I have to do is impose a tariff. The more, the faster they move in. The higher the tariff, it's very serious. It's inversely proportional. The higher the tariff, the faster they come. And yeah, we're going to be doing that. That's going to be like we have on cars. We have, as you know, a 25% tariff on cars. We have a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. And that's what that category fits right now.
Do you have a percentage in mind? You have a timeline?
I have a timeline, yeah, not too distant future. And we're doing it because we want to make our own drugs. We're doing it because we want to make our own steel and aluminum, lumber, other things. And they're all coming in. We have record numbers, $7 trillion. Since I announced, like a month and a half ago, since I came in, we have over $7 trillion being invested in the country. We didn't have...
Is any of this true? No, of course it's not true. Of course, none of this is true. What has Donald Trump ever said that's correct? I mean, what he's going to do, when he says he's going to do something, I guess there is some veracity to that, but that's not like if he says he's going to engage in ridiculous deportations of people, or when he says that he's going to do this to American citizens as well, yeah, treat that as the truth. He will try. But as far as like things that he claims have happened, everything is a lie. In terms of the economy, tariffs, its impact, everything that he's saying is a lie, straight up. When he says this is going to fix the trade deficit, that's a lie. When he says he's going to bring manufacturing to the United States with this action, that's a lie. It is physically impossible for him to do so. Okay? It is not possible for him to do this without severe government-funded initiatives to build a robust base of manufacturing in the United States of America. He will not be able to do any of these things.
Market's up today. It's we also had, you know, we a lot of people didn't say it the way it was. We had the largest gain in the stock market in history on every single category.
Yeah, after the largest cataclysmic dip of the stock market, there was a brief moment of recovery, and yet it's still incredibly unstable due to his administration going back and forth. That's the other side of this. The instability caused by Donald Trump going back and forth on the tariffs and exemptions, and then going back on the exemptions. That in and of itself does not exactly spell order, instability, and therefore causes people to go, yeah, I will invest trillions of dollars into this magical American manufacturing. Why should it?
Clarification. You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized American?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too, and I'm all for it because we can do things with the president for less money and have great security. And we have a huge prison population. We have a huge number of prisons, and then we have the private prisons, and some are operated well, I guess, and some aren't. But he does a great...
This is him once again reconfirming that he's interested in sending American citizens to El Salvador in an unprecedented fashion as well.
Great job with that. We have others that we're negotiating with too. But no, if it's a homegrown criminal, I have no problem. Now, we're studying the laws right now. Pam is studying. If we can do that, that's good. And I'm talking about violent people. I'm talking about really bad people. Really bad people. Every bit as bad as the ones coming in. And I made the statement when I heard about this a long time ago now, 4 years ago. When I heard that this guy was having open borders, I said every single criminal from all over the world is going to be dumped into our country. And that's what happened. The jails of the Congo were emptied out. The jails of Venezuela were emptied out. And you know what happened?
He used to say the jails in El Salvador were emptied out too. I thought it was really strange when he would hit on Nayib Bukele. I remember him doing that, claiming that Bukele was doing this as well. He said it at CPAC too, which was odd because like Bukele had attended a bunch of the CPAC conferences and was getting a lot of love from American Republicans. Seemingly that has changed.
I went way down. But
I
now
feel like he's lying. Yeah, of course he's lying. What are you talking about? These people are not opening up their prisons and dumping their prisoners into the United States. You can't do that. That's not a thing that's not even a thing you can facilitate.
Venezuela has other problems. You know what the problem is?
The irony, of course, is that the only time a country that is capable of doing that has done that is the United States of America. That's how MS-13 was created. MS-13 was a gang that was created in the American prison system, and we sent all of the MS-13 prisoners to El Salvador. We flew them in on flights, commercial jets, without telling the Salvadorian government that these were MS-13 gang members, and we just simply deported them without informing El Salvador that these were MS-13 gang members. So when Donald Trump says, like, this is something that other countries are doing, he probably doesn't even know that we did that. He has no idea that we literally did that to El Salvador. But that is how MS-13 became such a powerful organization.
I have no money because I shut off their oil. And we put secondary tariffs because they're not doing what's right over there. They know what to do. We spoke to them. I spoke to them. They know what to do. So El Salvador is an interesting one because I know the president. He's a young guy, and he's been getting this great press that his crime rate's way down, and they're training their criminals. Well, you don't train criminals, okay? You know, maybe every once in a while you get lucky, but you don't. So in El Salvador, murders are down 70%. He's saying, yes, we're teaching. He's different. Most of them just say, well, the United States is stupid, so we're dumping all our criminals there. He does it differently, smart. He goes, we're working with our people that are causing problems and crime. And he's not working with them. He's dumping them in the United States. And their crime rate, their murder rate is down 72%.
See?
73% and going up. And I don't blame him because of...
Yeah. He used to falsely claim that Nayib Bukele was also dumping prisoners into the United States of America. Here is a Wall Street Journal report on why the El Salvador President Bukele is so popular with Trump's inner circle and also so popular with like conservatives across the board.
Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele has become one of the biggest right-wing icons in the world. His crackdown on El Salvador's gangs has inspired many in the U.S. conservative movement, especially members of Trump's inner circle.
A lot of us in the MAGA movement believe that the good ideas we've seen in El Salvador, we can learn from.
Bukele has agreed to accept U.S. detainees at El Salvador's mega prison, making him a key player in Trump's mass deportation strategy.
I have great respect for him. I know him. He's very tough on crime.
But concern is growing over Bukele's increasingly close relationship with Trump and many of his allies. Since taking office in 2019, Bukele has helped turn a country that was once the murder capital of the world into one of the safest in Latin America.
We did the unthinkable to cleanse our society.
He has jailed over 1% of the population, giving El Salvador the highest incarceration rate in the world. He also built the world's largest prison, known as Cecot. But the country's transformation hasn't come without criticism. Since 2022, Bukele has ruled under emergency powers that suspend...
Insane. Like, implemented martial law, and it's also more than 1%, so it was almost 2% of the population. Think about how insane that is, bro.
Civil liberties, including due process.
Yeah, no due process. It's crazy. And our right-wing politicians are looking at that and going, this is fantastic. This is an incredible idea. This is amazing. We need to do that. And they are doing that.
The president addressed the concerns of rights groups in 2024, saying this.
They were worried about the human rights of the killers. which, you know, they have human rights. I don't say they don't, they're humans. But if you have to prioritize, what will you prioritize?
He's a democratically elected president.
Damian Merlo has been working with Bukele since 2018 and acts as the president's advisor and his link to D.C.
If people aren't happy, then the next election they can vote for someone else.
People are participating at a very high rate in these elections, and they are voting for his party and for his allies.
Former Congressman Matt Gaetz led the launch of a bipartisan El Salvador caucus in 2024.
My friends.
He owns a home there and visits several times a year.
Oh my God. Oh God.
Bukele's landslide victory in 2024 came after the courts allowed him to seek re-election, despite a constitutional ban on running for a second consecutive term.
I believe El Salvador should amend their constitution, should remove the presidential term limit, and should allow President Bukele to continue this transformation.
Woo! This is like the Xi Jinping but for fascists, okay? What social democrats and democratic socialists and socialists alike look towards, like the governance of Xi Jinping in China, for fascists, like they're like, oh, Nayib Bukele is the method. He is the man for the moment. No wonder they love collaborating with this guy.
Vera Bergen-Gruen is one of 2 U.S. journalists who have interviewed Bukele in the last 5 years.
When he became president, there was quite a noticeable shift where he started, for example, tweeting a lot more in English. And even the videos that are in Spanish tend to have English subtitles.
La criminalidad.
He knows that's where his growing fan club is. One of the other things that really struck me is also how he's changed some of the rhetoric he uses. For example, in his interview with Tucker Carlson and also in general, he speaks a lot more about God.
All my security cabinet are believers. They all believe in God. We're a secular country, of course, but we all believe in God.
He speaks a lot more in the language of kind of the Christian right wing in the United States. And
this shit is totally fake, by the way. Like, all this God stuff is... He's just... I mean, I guess he's similar to Donald Trump in that vein. Trump being like, I love the Bible. I love the Bible. It's my favorite. I love all the verses.
And everyone I spoke to in El Salvador and elsewhere who's tracked him for a long time says that kind of language is quite new.
President Bukele sort of first was noticed by the MAGA movement when we did the visit to the Heritage Foundation.
That's the Conservative Research Institute in D.C. behind Project 2025, a controversial policy blueprint for the federal government.
I think most governments would rather let people have guns than free speech. Free speech is a real threat to them.
Well, that's why they hate free speech.
Yeah, also, this guy literally disbanded free speech with martial law.
He was invited to CPAC, which is sort of an annual Woodstock for...
Like, thank God Wall Street Journal is talking about this, right?
Republicans. What I remember so vividly is as President Bukele was coming in the back room in the kitchen, the entire hotel staff, it seemed, was there holding "We Love You, Bukele," holding their Salvadorian flags. And he gave this remarkable speech.
They say globalism comes to die at CPAC. I'm here to tell you...
Dog, you are literally the El Salvadorian president. You are the Salvadorian president. What do you mean globalism? Dude, one of the funniest things that I used to point to is when Nayib Bukele would say we're killing globalism, or when Viktor Orban does the same. They do the same thing. They go to CPAC and they talk about how, like, we're killing globalism in America. You're just global at that point.
That in El Salvador, it's already dead.
He probably had the second longest line for pictures after President Trump.
Can anyone here tell me what would happen to the illegal alien from El Salvador if he came back to the United States? Does anyone here know? Does anyone want to guess? Any of you?
He could be with his family.
Does any of you know the answer to the question? Legally, what would happen if he came back here? Does any of you know? Any of you?
He goes through the court system once again to get his asylum application processed. Yeah, and he lives with his family and continues to work at the union job that he had. You know, he's not illegal. He's quite literally not illegal. This distinction, the saddest state of affairs here is always that these guys recognize that the distinction between someone who is a documented non-citizen and an undocumented non-citizen is simply a piece of paperwork. And these guys refuse to entertain the notion of said paperwork ever being given out to people, assuming that if you are at any point, a non-citizen, naturalized or not, you are just not a real American and you can be deported and you should be deported. That's the point. That's it. So when people say, like, why don't they come the right way? Like, this is a person who actually is going through the process. This is a person that was going through the process and went through the process and got protections against being deported. Asylum seekers are here legally. Do you understand? Asylum seekers are here legally. When people say, oh, no, don't care, they're non-citizens, like, they are here legally.
Do you really believe the Supreme Court?
I'm talking.
Do you
now.
really believe the Supreme Court
I'm talking now.
doesn't think he should be returned? Why was it unanimous?
You're done. Does any of you know the answer to the question? Does any of you? You've been talking about it for days.
All would deport him again. No.
He would be arrested.
Okay.
He'd be put in confinement. He would be deported the second time to El Salvador again, because there's no withholding order for an alien who's a member of a foreign terrorist organization, number one. Number two is the gang that he's a member of doesn't exist in El Salvador anymore. So what you're asking for is to be deported twice. But additionally, if we chose to pretend, just pretend, that the withholding order was real, he would be deported to a different country. So, for example, he could be deported to Egypt. So I'm just trying to understand, is it your view?
No, that's not how that. Why would that happen? Like, this is psychotic. I don't.
In other words, you have to find a country that would be willing to take a MS-13 member from El Salvador. So I'm trying to understand from you all is
not an MS-13 member.
So if he came back and under our laws, he was then deported to Egypt, or
if he had actually done something severe enough to be deported, then yes, he would not be deported to El Salvador. He would be deported to a different country. Having said that, he has done no crimes. So why would he ever be deported? The only thing that the courts have actually agreed on is that he should not be deported. He has done nothing that is deportable, and that he definitely should not be deported to El Salvador. That's what the courts have declared. And yet this administration, in direct violation of previous court orders, did deport him for no reason whatsoever, falsely claimed that he was MS-13, and also deported him to the one country that the previous court hearings had determined he should not be deported to.
To Somalia, would you then be saying, great, I'm so glad that you deported him to another country? Is that what you'd all be saying? Like, do you understand our immigration laws at all? But
No, he doesn't understand. Well, he doesn't care about what the immigration laws are, obviously. There is, I mean, this is a truly horrifying situation. It's unconscionable, it's immoral, and it is also unconstitutional. They're kidnapping people, they're disappearing people into El Salvador, and it's very obvious that this is the modus operandi. They're not going to change it. This is one day after the highly anticipated Oval Office meeting, where the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, said he would not return a wrongly deported Maryland man being held in his country in the Cecot anti-terror facilities. The federal judge who ordered his return will hear from the Trump administration's attorneys at a court hearing on this wonderful afternoon. Okay, that's going to be happening in a couple hours. We're, of course, talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who is now entering his second month in the El Salvador mega prison after he was deported there on March 15th, even though there was a 2019 court order that barred his deportation to that country. Okay? That means that in an immigration court, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was found to, one, not be a member of any gang whatsoever, but more importantly than that, specifically not deportable to the country of El Salvador, given that he was not only not a gang member, not a member of MS-13 at all, but also beyond that, he had actually given information up on a competing Salvadoran gang, which put his life in the crosshairs if he were to ever return to El Salvador. This is precisely how he got a 2019 court order for a withdrawal of removal. A withdrawal of removal has a higher standard to clear than a pure asylum application. Okay? He had sufficiently proven in court that he was endangered. Okay? He had delivered information on a Salvadoran gang in the past as well, which put his life in harm's way if he were to ever return to El Salvador. Do you understand? Trump administration officials, on the other hand, claim falsely that Abrego Garcia, who escaped political violence in El Salvador in 2011, is a member of the criminal gang MS-13, and yet they have provided zero evidence. A withhold of removal. Did I say withdrawal? Oh, God damn it. I mess this up every time. A withholding of removal. Okay? It is, you go to the courts, there's a couple different things you can do as a migrant, as an immigrant, as an asylum seeker, okay? Someone who is escaping political violence, okay? One of the things you can ask for is a withholding of removal, which means that as a Salvadoran, as a Salvadoran man, as someone from El Salvador, if you come to the United States of America and seek asylum on U.S. soil and prove in a court of law that you are escaping political persecution or any sort of like serious violence, that you can make it so that it is illegal for the government to deport you to El Salvador, even if you haven't processed your asylum eligibility, even if you haven't completed your asylum application, even if you haven't completed your immigration status, for example. That still means that the government cannot remove you from U.S. soil and send you to El Salvador. And that's precisely what the American government did. And not only did they do that, but they kept lying about how he was a terrorist, how he was an MS-13 member, how he was a terrorist. It is disgusting. And it is just pure white nativist, white supremacist, anti-immigrant garbage. And yet, seemingly, given the past couple of years of uninterrupted, unrestricted, white supremacist, anti-immigrant garbage that has dominated the airwaves, there is very little pushback that was developed in this process. People are not ready and well-equipped to actively fight against such a thing. Now, for those of you who don't know the background of this deal, this scheme that has been put together, the Trump administration has set up an arrangement where they are paying El Salvador $6 million to house migrants deported from the United States as a part of President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown. $6 million, okay? Small price to pay for having a slave labor colony where you can just make people disappear to, okay? This slave labor colony also is not beholden to U.S. constitutional protections, of course. It's like Gitmo on steroids, basically. And yesterday, there was obviously a meeting in the Oval Office where Attorney General Pam Bondi and Stephen Miller spoke on the matter. Let's take a look at the ABC News coverage on this, and I'll talk about it a little bit more.
Legal showdown over a wrongfully deported Salvadoran national. The Trump administration is resisting a Supreme Court order to facilitate the man's return to the U.S., and El Salvador's president refused to send the men back in a White House meeting with President Trump. Senior national correspondent Terry Moran has the story.
Unfortunately, withholding is a final order of removal that is withheld, but the government can exercise that final order at their discretion. That is also false. You are wrong. The federal government could technically remove the withholding order, okay? They could, but there's a process to do that. The Trump administration did not do that. In that court process, you have to go through the details. You have to go through what this person has done, go through the background and detail out exactly why the previous court order was wrong. They did not process this application at all. There was no due process whatsoever. And to take it one step further, a federal government immigration attorney unironically admitted that they had up. This is why we are having this conversation right now, because when you look at all of the data that civil rights groups and immigration advocacy groups have compiled at this point, 90% of all of the people that have been deported to Cecot right now in El Salvador have no crimes, no criminal background whatsoever. 90%. The only reason why we are talking about this Maryland man is because the federal government admitted that they had engaged in this wrongdoing, specifically because he had the background. He had the previous court order. And yes, Aaron Reichlin Melnick, who I rely on quite a bit, senior fellow at IMM Council, has put together a wonderful presentation of the timeline of Abrego Garcia's gang allegations and what the facts are and what the fictitious nature of the claims are. I'm going to get to that in a second. Let's look at what the Trump administration is saying first and foremost.
Good morning, Terry. Good morning, George. It's a nightmare scenario here. The Trump administration admits it mistakenly deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia to that notorious prison in El Salvador, and now they say the U.S. is powerless to get him back, despite an order upheld by the Supreme Court to bring him home.
Not only are they doing this to non-citizens, they want to do this to citizens as well. Just remember, this is how it slowly but surely turns into something that is illegal. It turns from something that the government is doing that is completely illegal to something that is legal and expected. Okay? It doesn't happen overnight. It took decades to get to this point in the war on terror, post 9/11 era in the United States of America. There's clearly a lot of appetite for this kind of violence from a big chunk of the population who does not understand how terrifying this is, who have no capacity to demonstrate empathy for their fellow man, and therefore they're championing this because they think this is immigration enforcement. Donald Trump recognizes that immigration enforcement is a big part of why he won. So he's doing all of the erosions of due process and the erosions of the First Amendment over immigration enforcement. But it's not going to stop at immigration enforcement. Once you can do anything and everything you want to non-citizens and you eradicate due process, you can just simply consider citizens to be non-citizens as well. And once you clearly deport them to El Salvador, to this terror facility, it seems like even the Supreme Court cannot demand that you bring these people back. This is where we're at. If the Democratic Party does not actually fight back against this, if people don't make a big fuss about this, if people don't actually go out and not only protest, but also try to desperately get more people on board with how unjustifiable this action is, we are cooked. America is officially within the 1930s Nazi Germany arc, okay? The Burger Reich.
In February, he said this.
I'm just saying, if we had the legal right to do it, I would do it in a heartbeat.
All this is Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
When will you advocate for more forceful resistance against the Nazi government? Just curious what the line is for you. Hasanabi, that's a very funny and interesting question to ask someone who has to maintain a platform to consistently inform the broader public. Yeah, dude. The answer is never, okay? Are you stupid? Of course I'm not going to advocate for violence. Are you crazy? Is this bait? Are you a federal agent? Do you know what my job is? My job is to educate the masses, okay? Please.
A Salvadoran migrant, husband and father living in Maryland, languishes in that notorious Salvadoran prison despite a court order that the administration must bring him back to the U.S.
Big homie's looking at the Trump administration doing Nazi stuff and going, hey, why won't you agitate for people to engage in direct acts of violence so that we can send you to the El Salvador facility, as a matter of fact?
Trump at first said he'd abide by the Supreme Court's ruling.
If they said to bring him back, I would tell them to bring him back.
Now the administration says their hands are tied.
That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us.
But in the Oval Office, the president of El Salvador made clear he's got no plans to send Abrego Garcia back to the U.S.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous.
The Democratic leader of the House calling on the courts to use judicial powers.
Virtually every single person from the administration and people in their sphere of influence is just lying on this man. So let's talk about the actual truth. Let's talk about the background of Abrego Garcia. This is Aaron Reichlin-Melnick, senior fellow of IMM's counsel, updating this timeline to fix a typo and error in the last box, presenting the full version of Mr. Abrego's time in the U.S. using court documents to explain the allegations of gang membership and what actually happened in his case. Here it is. Okay. Entry and early life. Hold on. 2011 to 2019. Okay. Kilmar Abrego Garcia flees El Salvador to the U.S. at the age of 16 after M18 gang members extort his family and threaten to kill him and rape his sisters if they didn't keep paying. He moves in with his U.S. citizen brother in Maryland and lives there without trouble for years. Then comes, on March 28th, 2019, the PGPD arrest. Kilmar is arrested for loitering outside of a Home Depot while looking for day labor. A Prince George's County Police Department detective grills him about whether he's a gang member. He denies any involvement. 4 hours later, he is transferred to ICE custody without the PGPD charging him for any offense. In April 2019, here are the allegations. At a bond hearing, ICE claims Kilmar is a part of MS-13. They submit one piece of evidence, a gang field interview sheet, a GFIS, filled out by the PGPD detective that claims Kilmar is a part of MS-13. The GFIS says he was wearing Chicago Bulls gear, and two, a confidential informant allegedly claimed that Kilmar was a ranking member of the Westerns clique, which is in Long Island. Except there's a problem there. Abrego has never been in Long Island. He's never been in New York at all. So this evidence is fabricated. And lo and behold, the local detective, as a matter of fact, that accused Mr. Abrego Garcia of being a member of MS-13 was suspended from the police force and indicted merely weeks later for providing confidential information to a sex worker who he was paying in exchange for sexual acts. That's right. I repeat, the cop who initially attested to Abrego Garcia's alleged MS-13 membership was subsequently suspended and indicted for serious professional misconduct. Remember, we're talking about a cop here, okay? If a police officer, a detective, is fired and suspended and indicted for misconduct, that means they must have gone above and beyond. Do you understand what I am saying? And the confidential informant that he used was also unreliable. The evidence itself that they presented was immediately disproven, and I'm going to get to in a second, okay? But remember, the Maryland police officer who formally attested to Abrego Garcia's supposed gang affiliation in 2019, when he was first detained the first time, was subsequently suspended from the police force for a serious transgression, giving confidential information about a case to a sex worker the New Republic has established. This officer, apparently a senior detective in Abrego Garcia's case in 2019, is named Ivan Mendez, according to information provided to Abrego Garcia's lawyer by, at the time, Lucia Cruel, who is also a member of his current legal team. Mendez was subsequently indicted for his offense, pleaded guilty, and received probation. So that's another thing. So let's continue. An investigation follows in the summer of 2019. Kilmar's lawyers reach out to the PGPD to investigate these claims. They find out that, one, police did not even file an incident report about his arrest, and two, the detective that had filled out the GFIS has been suspended for an unknown reason. We now know what the reason is. I just described to you what the reason is. In August 2019, there is an IJ decision. At his final bond hearing, ICE declines to offer any evidence of gang membership other than what is in the GFIS. The IJ denies bond, finding that the GFIS is sufficient proof of membership at the time, despite noting its obvious flaws. Kilmar appeals this decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Now, remember, the immigration courts are an extension of the federal government. They're an extension of ICE, okay? So you have the process where you can appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals, but ultimately this is somewhat irrelevant because the erroneous decision making there is it's basically an extension. It's a processor of what the federal government or what the immigration enforcement authorities want to do. That's all they're there to do. They're rubber stamping this stuff, okay? The immigration courts are under the DOJ, part of the executive branch, and not under the judiciary. So just remember that. Having said that, the only reason why I'm mentioning this is because something silly and frivolous like this that is immediately disproven can still cause someone to basically be branded as a member of a criminal organization when there's no evidence whatsoever for it. Okay? What is the point of those courts if they just 100% accept everything anyway? It's a way to create paperwork, so to show that there's some sort of process. It's the same principle behind FISA courts. The FISA courts are there to rubber stamp warrantless surveillance and offer them a warrant, right? But it's better that even that exists than not have it exist at all, if that makes sense. Although it is still a rubber stamp protocol, it's still good that even that rubber stamping of the protocol exists as opposed to not existing, because when it doesn't exist at all, then you have no paperwork, you have no way of holding up this process, you have no way of stopping these sorts of things from happening. Okay? Now, withholding when the immigration judge rules on October 2019 that Kilmar is ineligible for asylum because he filed the application too late, but the judge does grant withholding of removal, finding that it was more likely than not that he would be subject to persecution if deported to El Salvador. A removal order is issued, but with a restriction that one country he cannot be deported to is El Salvador. Okay? Then comes the BIA decision. The Board of Immigration Appeals decision in December 2019. Kilmar appeals the bond decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. The appeals board declines to find clear error in the immigration judge's decision to rely on the GIFIS document. However, he is released anyway because he had won a withholding of removal. He returns to normal life from 2019 to 2025. By all reports, Kilmar lives a normal life in Maryland with his U.S. citizen wife, their biological son, and his 2 stepchildren, with the work permit he received as a result of his grant of withholding of removal. He works legally as a sheet metal worker, joins a union, and raises his family in a D.C. suburb. He doesn't get into any trouble with the law in these years. And then on March 2025, he gets sent to Cecot. On March 12, 2025, ICE and HSI agents arrest Kilmar in his car in front of his son. 3 days later, he's transferred to Texas, where, thanks to an admitted administrative error, he is put on a plane to El Salvador and sent to Cecot. So this is just a person that is married, that has immediate family members in the United States of America, that was falsely smeared as an MS-13 gang member, and every step of that process, there was enough evidence to suggest that not only was he not an MS-13 gang member, that he was directly at threat by MS-13 gang members if they were to send him back to El Salvador. Okay? If they were to send him back to El Salvador, that MS-13, he's so not MS-13 that they would kill him. That is what the courts have found. And yet, every single person still that, on the one hand, admit that they falsely deported him, are simultaneously claiming that he is an MS-13 gang member, and also that it's good that he is in El Salvador, and there's no way to bring him back. Okay? In a normal process, in a just world, Abrego Garcia enters the United States fleeing El Salvador because of fleeing the gang violence in El Salvador, and expeditiously gets an asylum claim that is granted to him. Clearly, if there is a withholding of removal that a court gave him, that literally means that there is enough here, or more than an asylum application, as a matter of fact, more than just a simple asylum application. This means that there is additional evidence that he's presented as to why he cannot be deported to El Salvador, and that a judge oversaw this evidence and said, yes, there is enough evidence here for you not to be deported specifically to El Salvador. Okay? It's more than an asylum application. It is a higher standard to clear than an asylum application. It is shocking, I guess. I guess it's not really unexpected that the administration would be this careless and this inconsiderate, because they are fascist. All right? But just so you know, when people say he is MS-13, that is a lie. Okay? That's just a lie. He is so not MS-13 that he is directly in the crosshairs of MS-13, at least according to an immigration judge that said, we can't deport this man to El Salvador specifically. There's enough evidence here to suggest that we cannot, because he is so not MS-13, we cannot deport him to El Salvador, because they'll kill him in El Salvador if he goes there. And yet here we are. I want to point to something here. The very fact that we are even covering this story is because the administration, the immigration attorney on the federal side admitted that there was an administrative error, because there was one, right? There was an administrative error, and they admitted that there was an administrative error, which turned this into a bigger story. There are plenty of people that this administration has actively deported that did no wrongdoing whatsoever. Some of them were temporary protected status holders. Some of them were in the process of seeking out their asylum claims. Some of them had been in the country for longer than they could actually process their asylum claim, so they potentially could not get an asylum claim, but they should get one, that they should get amnesty, right? Under normal circumstances, in a world where we have a normal process for immigration, we would file amnesty, conditional amnesty, to all of these people, 90% of them that have done no wrongdoing whatsoever, and now they're in a torture slave prison for the crime of crossing an imaginary boundary and wanting a better future for themselves and their children. Kidnapped in the street. Some of them so falsely and erroneously kidnapped from the street that ICE itself, in the process of said kidnapping, will recognize that it's not the right person. Manuel Gutierrez, sent from New York to El Salvador prison, although family says he has no criminal history or gang ties. He's 19 years old. A 19-year-old Venezuelan in New York City reportedly was apprehended by Trump administration immigration authorities and deported to El Salvador, despite agents realizing he was not whom they meant to arrest in a targeted operation. These are called, I believe they're called like collateral, something along, I forget what the term is that ICE uses, but they'll say like it's a collateral arrest. So, you know, wrong place, wrong time, doesn't matter. We can boost our numbers this way. The points-based system that they have for determining whether or not someone is a criminal gang member is already ridiculous. This is precisely the reason why that gay hairstylist was kidnapped and deported because he had mom and dad tattoos on his arms. Or that other person who works with children with disabilities who had an autism awareness tattoo dedicated to his autistic cousin. That's why he was kidnapped. There was another person who had a Real Madrid tattoo with a crown and a soccer ball. That's why he was kidnapped. It's ridiculous. And now all of those people are now in this torture prison with seemingly no way of returning them. But the only reason why we're talking about specifically Abrego Garcia is that, unlike those people, Abrego Garcia had a previous court order that said you cannot deport him to El Salvador, and yet the government violated that previous court order anyway. And on top of that, the Supreme Court found that the federal government has to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia in a unanimous decision. And yet, the Trump administration is claiming that the Supreme Court actually gave them all of the power here because it's a matter of foreign policy. It's not a matter of foreign policy. We have determined wrongdoing in the past within the immigration enforcement system and have even demanded El Salvador return people that we sent to Cecot. The Trump administration has done this. Every administration prior, in the process of mass deportations, because we have a cruel white nativist immigration agenda, have falsely sent people overseas and sent people to countries that they are not supposed to be sent to. And then we have followed through. CEO of Bad Takes. Yeah, I'm the CEO of Bad Takes. Do you have a good take? Do you have a counter to anything that I'm saying? Do you have any sort of counter narrative here, or are you just simply going to go la la? He's Mexican and therefore terrorist. Sucks to suck. The Great White Hope is fixing the country, right? That's what you're going to say. I know they were MS-13. Yep, there you go. No, they weren't. I just spent the entire past hour. If you understood the English language, if you had the processing capabilities, you would know that no, that person was not MS-13 at all. Not confirmed by the detectives either. The detective that wrote the erroneous report literally was subsequently suspended from the force. Like a couple weeks after he sent in that report. The report itself had 2 key pieces of evidence that suggest that Abrego Garcia was MS-13. One, that he had a Chicago Bulls hoodie? Ridiculous. That's not indication that anyone is an MS-13 member at all. And the second piece of evidence was a confidential informant, which, by the way, was not even a confidential informant. It was just one of the other guys at Home Depot that the detectives had actually nabbed, that falsely claimed that Abrego Garcia was a member of an MS-13 gang that was based out of Long Island. Abrego Garcia had never been to Long Island. So how was he a part of a Long Island MS-13 gang when he had never been there? There is no more an open shut court case than this one. It's ridiculous. And yet people who are severely mentally backwards, mentally stunted, refuse to reckon with the reality in front of them and instead just go back to the same old dumb takes where they're like, nah, I don't care, dude. He's a MS-13 gang member. They rape children. He was raping children. In your mind, you have to fantasize about this guy being the big bad, because otherwise, God forbid, you entertain the truth that this person is not a member of MS-13 and he was falsely shipped off to El Salvador, even though a previous immigration court had decided he cannot be sent to El Salvador specifically because of how not MS-13 he is. I like to think that the cognitive dissonance demonstrated here by a lot of people who try to defend the administration's actions, especially when it comes to immigration enforcement, the reasons why they fantasize about how violent and dangerous this person was not only because they have this white supremacist dog in them that causes them to think every person that's brown is actually a child rapist MS-13 gang member, but also because deep down they know that if a person who is clearly innocent is shipped off into a slave labor colony overseas with no means of returning this person, that's kind of up. So they just don't want to believe the up thing. So they delude themselves into thinking, no, it must not be up. Even when the government admits that they're up. That part that scares me is that trans people are next. Every single day I watch all this happening, knowing my number's about to be called. You're fine for the time being, I think. But, anti-trans legislation is already popping off all over. Maybe not deportation.
In today's Capitol Close-Up, we welcome Maryland's Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen to discuss the latest developments.
Yeah, I really like what Chris Van Hollen is doing, and I really hope that other Democrats take notice of it and also participate in this. I think what he's doing is good. And also demonstrates bravery as well. He's technically putting himself in harm's way by doing this. If he actually follows through on this and goes to El Salvador, much respect to him. I think that it is time for doing exactly this.
Regarding Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man wrongfully deported to El Salvador. Senator, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Steve, good to be with you.
So a lot to get through, obviously, in a short amount of time, but let's focus right now on Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I know you reached out to the embassy here in D.C., the embassy of El Salvador, to try to request a meeting with the president of El Salvador while he is in D.C., meeting with President Trump. Have you had any success?
I've not. I reached out to request that meeting to talk about the, as you say, illegal detention of Abrego Garcia. We've not heard back from the president at this point in time.
You also mentioned if you didn't hear back, then you'd be willing to go to El Salvador. Is that still the case?
Yes, it is, Steve. I'll be going later this week. If he's not released, we still hope that he will be released. But I think it's important that we go to El Salvador to show his family, his wife, his mother, his brother, his kids, that we're not giving up on this because, as you indicated, the Trump administration has admitted that this was done in error.
This is the first time I'm not even joking when I say this is the first time I've felt even a modicum of confidence. A modicum of confidence and competence coming from the Democratic Party. Okay? This is what our public servants are supposed to do. They are supposed to uphold the law no matter what. They're supposed to defend their constituents no matter what. Abrego Garcia is a constituent. Okay? This is brave. This is bold. This is what the expectation is from all Democrats. I do not care about his other takes. I don't care about anything right now with the exception of this initiative. Okay? He is right. Is the idea that any adversary is MS-13 the American equivalent of they're all Hamas? Yes. I worry they will fumble it like they only care about this case because it breaks the law. No, this is a very, very important thing. This is a very important thing that they're doing. It's a very important step that they're taking. Okay? And by the way, this is in some ways not dissimilar to how Doctors Without Borders operates. Like when you're a white guy, when you're a white American citizen, when you're a white man who's an American citizen, for example, you have a certain set of privileges that that puts you at a higher categorization as a target by any state. Okay, when you're a senator on top of that, you have literally the top level priority. So things that other foreign nations can do to you reflect on America as a whole. Do you see what I mean? This is incredibly important. Like, I think this should be, is your arguments optics, guys, but unironically, because I agree. No, this isn't just optics either. This is putting your body on the line. You're using your privilege as a shield. You're using it as at the very least, as a way to refocus people's priorities and attentions to this incredibly unjust deportations regime. Do you see what I'm saying? This is actual action. I think that a competent Democratic Party would quite literally send an entire coalition of people armed to the gills with immigration attorneys and civil rights litigators down to El Salvador on a mission all together, okay, and make themselves impossible to deny, make themselves impossible to avoid. That is precisely what should be happening here. Yeah, if something happens to a U.S. senator, it becomes an international incident. It reflects poorly on El Salvador, and Trump looks weak if he doesn't respond to any provocations by El Salvador. Exactly. Do you see what I mean? Like, this becomes a major issue of consequence for the Trump administration if, as the American president, he literally lets El Salvador, a much tinier, much less powerful nation, dominate not only American citizens like this, but literally a senator. Do you see what I mean? Nah, they'll just say the senator was a terrorist. No shot. I don't think Americans will stand for it. I don't think Americans will stand for it. I disagree that Trump will look weak to his base. He'll just support it. They'll love that a Democrat is being hurt. No. I think you guys are wrong, and I think you're misunderstanding Trump's base in general. Yes, there will be the Asmongold coalition, but they are far from the... It's an unknown senator. Dude, it's a senator. What are you talking about? Why do you think the cartels don't touch American citizens and literally turn around and apologize when they accidentally kidnap or, God forbid, kill an American citizen? What happens if an American citizen is harmed by any citizen, like a traveler, okay, a tourist, accidentally gets kidnapped by the cartel? What do? They assassinate the cartel members that actually did wrongdoing to the American citizen. Why? Because the American passport is a reflection of American hegemonic power, okay? That's a literal random American that we're talking about. Not every country is like Israel, okay? Israel gets to do whatever it wants, but other countries cannot get the Israel exemption, okay? This is not Rashida Tlaib either. This is not Ilhan Omar. This is a white guy, dude. A white guy from Maryland. What are you guys talking about? The same principles, the same fundamentals that allow Americans to turn a blind eye to all this injustice because it's happening to brown people, white nativism, white supremacy, is the same principle that will cause them to pay close attention to a white man, senator from Maryland, going to El Salvador. You can't do certain things to a guy like that. I think the old rule set is dead, my guy. No, this will cause tremendous instability, okay? What is happening in chat, by the way? You guys are so pessimistic. You guys are so pessimistic that you're like, what? What's the alternative? That he do nothing? What is happening here? You underestimate the anger, Hasan. Mike was right. The Democratic base is reaching a boiling point. What are you talking about? This is why I'm saying senators like this and actions that are taken like this is actually a good thing, because it causes people to pay attention to what's going on. What are you saying right now? That this goes along with the anger and resentment and frustration that people experience. This is quite literally the point. This is infinitely more directionally appropriate than what Cory Booker was doing, okay? When you're a member of Congress, you have tremendous power, okay? I know that Donald Trump is actively trying to undermine the legislative body, and the Republicans have actually taken a lot of initiatives in that direction and have successfully undermined the legislative body, but you still have some powers in your hands, okay? As a senator, you can just get a coalition together and try to revoke any sort of like foreign aid going to El Salvador, for example. Like, these are things that you can advocate for. You can veto the pre-existing aid that's going to El Salvador. You can try and veto Trump's $6 million scheme, for example. Like, there's a lot that you can do. They have power. If they didn't have power, Trump wouldn't be actively trying to undermine the legislative body's power to begin with. Okay, 25% El Salvador GDP is U.S. aid. There you go. Shout out to Jim Jones for popping a senator at People's Temple on foreign land, ironically proving your point because he got flamed for it and investigated. Yeah.
I want to get some more right now in our top story, the legal saga over the fate of a Maryland man mistakenly...
Like, the very fact that this story is becoming a story, you have to understand something. If you're in here, if you're in this community, you've heard me talk about the deportations regime for quite a while. Nonstop. I've offered endless coverage to this issue. So you're obviously very well aware of what's going on. But average Americans, if you recall my conversation with Ested Herndon of the New York Times, average Americans are not fully focused on the deportation side, and they're utterly oblivious to the cruel deportations regime that Trump has implemented. They're utterly oblivious to the violation of due process. They're utterly oblivious to the violations of the First Amendment on the anti-Israel student kidnappings that are taking place. All of this stuff is happening as the public has not been able to focus on it at all. Meanwhile, this is the story that finally tilts the scales in our direction because people are covering it. The mainstream is consistently covering it. It's becoming a point of contention. This will change the 2080 issue into a 50-50 issue and then inevitably turn it into a 2080 issue in the other direction. This is how it happens. People do not magically have this information beamed into their brains. They have to see it. They have to understand why it's like cruel, why it's unjust. And all of those liberals that we mock here on a daily basis will play a formative role in getting the broad awareness campaign going. Okay? That's it. That's it. Even your MAGA parents need to see this reality and go, I'm turning sour on this stuff. I don't like it. That's how it goes. That's why I still actively yell at the Democratic Party despite not believing in them, because I want them to actually make a fuss. Because if they make a fuss, then the media covers it. And when the media covers it, then inevitably more people are aware of what's going on. They demand their congresspersons to make even more of a fuss. This is how change happens. It doesn't happen with, the revolutionary violence in the way that you think it's going to happen overnight, okay? This is the unfortunate, sad state of affairs. Change is marginal. It does not happen overnight, and it happens only with unlikely allies. You have to keep pushing over and over and over again. This is why I laugh whenever dunks who are neoliberals keep claiming, Hasan, you always have pie-in-the-sky ideas. You just want perfect to be an enemy of the good. And it's like, no, I don't. I understand that, but I want there to be some good. I understand how this system works a lot better than many of these Democratic Party writers do, okay? This is precisely the reason why I will go out to bat and actively entertain politicians who I'm at odds with, regardless of my differences in agreement, differences in opinion, because I know that they have a lot of power still. They have a lot of power to get older people and people who vote and people in other positions of power to pay attention to these sorts of issues. That's why I want Bernie Sanders to actively make more of a fuss in his rallies. Okay? This is going to change. I'm telling you right now. Chatters, up until this very moment, immigration was not at the forefront. People did not care about this, okay? Now you have national polls coming out with disapproval reaching the highest stage on immigration, Trump's strongest aspect, okay? Trump won on immigration, right? Democrats were terrified. Democrats were terrified of what Trump was doing on immigration. They were like, oh, yeah, we're going to be the immigrant deporters, actually. Trump is not serious on immigrant deportation. This is just the beginning. I don't know why people don't trust me when I talk about this. I've been doing this professionally for 10 years. It wasn't that long ago when you had liberal wine moms talking about abolishing ICE, dude, under the first Trump regime, because they recognized the cruelty, because the media started covering it. They were like, what are you doing? What do you mean child separation is a deterrence? That's insane. That's torturous. That's not American. That's un-American. People do not pay attention to politics. And a lot of people do not understand the impact of the policies that they're advocating for, okay? People don't care about facts. People don't care about logic. People cannot comprehend what the vision that they want for the future to actually look like once implemented, okay? Only after this vision is implemented do they go, oh my God, I was wrong. This sucks. And there is a very obvious example that is in front of us. Tariffs. Trump ran on tariffs. He said tariffs is the most beautiful word in the English language. People were like, yeah, I love tariffs. I yelled about how tariffs and the way that Trump is trying to implement them are idiotic over and over again for almost a year, and certainly over the course of the past couple of months. And yet, people did not listen. People did not understand it until it became a reality for them, until they were like, oh my God, the prices are going to go up. How did they start recognizing that? Because the media started covering it that way. Because politicians started yelling about it. Because they started fearing for their wallet. Once implemented, they flipped very quickly, if you noticed.
The president of the United States has a lot of power. El Salvador is a little country. The president could say to the president of El Salvador, I want this guy back. And that would be the end of it. Then he'd be on a plane.
And they've done it in the past, by the way. They've done it in the past. So it's not like they haven't done this. I want to stress this again and again and again. They have successfully facilitated the return of people that were falsely deported to both El Salvador and other countries as well. So the very notion that this is outside of their scope, outside of their power, is ridiculous. It's wrong. It's completely made up. What's the likelihood that he's dead? I hate this argument. I don't want to entertain it. It doesn't matter. This is like what Do you think this is a productive measure to like fantasize about whether or not he's been assassinated in Cecot? It's not. It's not productive at all. We don't know, and there is no reason. Why are y'all too scared to admit it's even possible? It's not fantasy. It's a reality. That is a possibility. Why are y'all so scared to admit? Because it's completely irrelevant to the point of contention here. Okay? It's unproductive and completely irrelevant to engage in doomerism at this very moment. It is a pure speculative fantasy in the direction of nihilism too. That's why it's dumb. Please stop. Please stop entertaining this. Please stop engaging in this baseless speculation. You are wrong on this one. Not one single hog will be won over by what CNN or anyone else outside of their own media cocoon says. You are still assuming that Republican lawmakers fear the wider electorate. There will not be free and fair elections. By the way, I have my own academic expertise in the study of fascism, and I'm 20 years older than you, so no more pulling the I'm the expert card. Okay, dude. You got it. Thanks. Don't worry. This kind of stuff has the capacity to have the Joe Rogans of the world be moved in this direction against Trump as well. You do not know what will happen. So stop fantasizing that there's nothing that we can do and that there's no change that can happen and that marginal improvements in getting people to be directionally focused on one of the most glaringly obvious, unconstitutional, fascist implications of policy from the Trump administration is a bad thing. Okay, it's bad. I'm 50 years old and I wrote my expertise is in fascism, so shut up and be a doomer is ridiculous. How is that in any way, shape, or form different than Fukuyama thought? Where, no, sorry, no more history will happen. No more history will happen. History is done. We ran out of history. Yeah, revolutions were a thing of the past. They will never happen again, ever again. So what should we do? Adopt a nihilistic framework and just be like, yeah, it sucks. Also, how can you say that something will not change public sentiment when Israel is right there? 2 years ago, Israel's approval rating was fantastic, okay? It's not like Israel wasn't an apartheid state 2 years ago. It still very much was. Look at Israel's approval rating now. It's in the dumps. Now, you might say the public is swayed in one direction, but that doesn't mean that the administration will follow through and be moved by the public opinion. And there's some truth to that. Okay? There is some truth to that, certainly. We're experiencing it right now. But there's only so much that the public can take until they say enough is enough. Okay? My job is to get you to that point. My job is to get as many people as possible to that point where they recognize that we are all frogs in a pan boiling right now. Okay? My job is to show you that we're in the pan and the water is boiling already.
You know, one of the complaints that we had in the Declaration of Independence at the beginning of the American Revolution was that King George was sending criminals to faraway prisons. It's almost like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. There's no legal authority to send a U.S. citizen to serve a U.S. criminal sentence in a foreign prison. And, you know, Kate, it would be pretty striking if there was, because that would mean any of us could be effectively disappeared.
That's the point. That is literally the point. That's what they want to do, by the way. That is what they want to do. Okay? I've been right so far on every single thing that I've said on what this administration is going to do. I've been right about this since 2017, 2018, as I talked about it back then as well. And that is the goal here. Okay? And if you trust me on my assessment on all of the surrounding things that I'm talking about, then trust me on the assessment that in terms of building a broad popular coalition that will actively try to undermine this administration's agenda, you need to have liberals on your side as well, okay? That's it. That's where all the momentum is. You look at all the polls that are conducted right now, and these stupid liberals still say Kamala Harris is the best possible candidate. They do not know what is good for them. Okay? It is up to you to convince them. And you can't do that by sitting on the sidelines and constantly complaining about how dumb they are. Okay? That's it. This is a powerful force here. There's 35,000 of you in here right now. It is up to you to convince your parents. It is up to you to convince your neighbors, to show them the way. And you can't do that if you're an annoying who's constantly complaining about everything and being a nihilistic. Okay? That's it. Lock in.
Now I want to play for you how President Trump's aide, Stephen Miller, is trying to interpret the Supreme Court's decision, how he believes it leaves them with no obligation to do anything further. Let me play this from yesterday.
Yes, it was a 9-0
in our favor.
In our favor against the district court ruling, saying that no district court
This is like such an insane interpretation.
To follow up on
Trump considering sending U.S. citizens convicted of crimes to El Salvador. By the way, we're moving in that direction already for Americans. Okay, first they will say we are removing Americans that have done heinous crimes to El Salvador, which is completely and utterly ridiculous. Okay, that's insane. Then anyone and everyone that they consider to be a terrorist for political dissidents, for example, will also be removed there. And once they've already decided that you are removable to El Salvador and there's no way of extracting you back, it's done. It is de facto an exterminationist policy. It is a prison. It is a slave labor camp. It is a place where you will be disappeared to with seemingly no way of retrieval. Do you understand that? Do you understand how psychotic that is? Wild that we are in the third month of the Trump administration and we're already entertaining this.
Overnight, in a temporary move, the Supreme Court blocking the deportation of Venezuelan migrants held in Texas under the Alien Enemies Act, a centuries-old law that provides little to no due process. The court ruling on an emergency appeal from the ACLU, directing the administration to pause the deportations until further order of this court. The ACLU saying they're relieved and that these men were in imminent danger of spending their lives in a horrific foreign prison without ever having had the chance to go to court. This comes amid the showdown over Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a migrant who was mistakenly deported to the infamous Cecot prison in El Salvador. Senator Chris Van Hollen arriving back in the U.S., recounting their face-to-face meeting.
He was traumatized by being at Cecot and fearful of many of the prisoners in other cell blocks.
Van Hollen says Salvadoran officials gave him.
Dude, the stuff that the right wing, the stuff that the right wing administration and right wing influencers have been doing surrounding the story, unironically resembles like the stirring and the smear, the smear campaigns that like online lol cows engage in. It is kind of wild experiencing that as someone who both covers the news and has a more professional understanding of critical media analysis, and as someone who also routinely is the target of this like bottom of the barrel type like smear campaigns that initially were focused on, I don't know, random dark corners of the internet, like anonymous forums like on 4chan or the doxing forum, which I will not name. And now because of Twitter, because of the Twitter purchase by Elon Musk and the 4chanification of Twitter, that has totally made the American government behave in the exact same way. There are photoshopped images, for example. It's kind of crazy that the Nayib Bukele administration in El Salvador and the MAGA movement across the board is engaging in some of the craziest ways to just lie actively. This is the hand of the man that the Democrats should feel should be brought back to the United States because he's such a fine and innocent person. They said he's not a member of MS-13, even though he's got MS-13 tattooed on his knuckles. And two highly respected courts found that he was a member of MS-13, beat up his wife, etc. I was elected to take bad people out of the United States, among other things. I must be allowed to do my job, make America great again. This right here is so insane. because like this is the worst, the fakest, most ridiculous Photoshop I have ever seen. I think they're trying to not say his fingers have MS-13 on it. They're trying to say that these images correspond to MS-13. Okay, but what's interesting about this is I don't even know if he has these finger tattoos. That's number one. And number two, they were so not MS-13 that not a single one of these tattoos were dinged initially. Not a single one of these tattoos was initially brought up in the first police report or the subsequent deportation reports. Because ICE fills a report to be like, these are the tattoos that we found on them to consider to be MS-13. And it's also wild because, this is New York Post runs an article suggesting the tattoos of Abrego's hands are a sign of MS-13 affiliation, using a tweet from Captive Dreamer, an actual Nazi, as a source. This is Jesse Singal criticizing it. Libs are even freaked out about this. Right-wing liberals are freaking out about this. Bill Kristol is writing about how insane this is. Like, in the previous Trump administration, you had liberals be like, we got to abolish ICE. Second Trump administration, you have liberals writing articles about assassinating high-profile politicians, and you have Bill Kristol talking about the abolition of ICE. I don't know where we go from here, but I am at least a little bit glad that like even the most right-wing neocon reactionary freaks that still have some semblance of like institutions and the defense of institutions are recognizing that there is a need for change. This doesn't mean that all of these guys are genuine. This does not mean that these people are your allies right now, or they will remain your allies. But the reality of the matter is, I think there is a change in the overall vibes and the overall attitudes from the American public. I'm hearing like the very fact that, you know, I can't wait till it happens or someone should do it. Like statements like that, vague statements like that are being pushed out openly on the timeline by liberals, okay? These are not like radical extremist. These are not radical extremist leftists saying this kind of stuff. It's actually your moms and your dads. It's like accountants, nurses, teachers, people that are people that you would never expect to say things like this. It is truly a wild time. And I think that the Democratic Party, of course, is not seizing on the moment and the anger and resentment. But I will say this has been my greatest moment of vindication, for the record. As Waifu Jenner Brent Mao says, you were saying a few weeks ago that normies don't know about the deportation regime. Has the Kilmar case changed that? Yes. What did I tell you? This is not even just like my moment of vindication for the past year. This is my moment of vindication for the past decade. I always have stressed the importance of Democratic politicians actively making a bigger deal about some of the awful things that the Trump administration or any administration is doing about migrants will inevitably cause media coverage around the atrocities, and that will inevitably cause the American public to very quickly turn around and go, this is unacceptable. I've been saying this. I've been saying this for years. I said this in the Biden administration, in the beginning of the Biden administration, where I openly stated early on, April or February of 2021, when the Biden administration was using Customs and Border Patrol to, whip Haitian asylum seekers at the border, I was saying they cannot do this. They have to abide by the campaign promises that they made the first 100 days of immigration, like actively trying to create pathways towards amnesty. And if they don't do that, and if they cave and capitulate the right-wing framing on this issue, which I expected they were going to do, which they of course did, that the entire conversation would flip to the right. And Americans will become incredibly reactionary on the issue of immigration, which happened. And in that time, in that exact time frame, I kept repeating over and over again, this is dangerous. This is very dangerous, both because this administration, the Trump administration, if they come into power, will actively seize on the right-wing white nativist sentiment and will do a cruel deportations regime. And if the liberals don't actually push back and don't counter message around this issue, Americans will be asleep. And for the first couple of months, Americans were indeed asleep. But the Kilmar Abrego situation changed that discourse. Why? Because the admin, due to one immigration attorney of the federal government and his moment of honesty, his brief moment of recognition and honesty, which he was subsequently fired over, okay, where they admitted that they had made a mistake in deporting Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland resident, to El Salvador, despite previous court orders not to deport this man to El Salvador. They made a mistake and they admitted that mistake, and that all of a sudden was a pivotal moment where people started focusing on this issue. And then Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, as I said, as I supported over and over again, actively pushed the issue and put his body on the line, flew directly down to El Salvador, and this became an even larger issue of note. It became an even more worthwhile issue. More media coverage around it, more attention being put on the Trump administration's erosion of due process, more focus around deportations and unjustifiable deportations in general. And this, in and of itself, is the reason as to why the El Salvador admin had to back away and get Chris Van Hollen, the Maryland senator, to visit Kilmar. I'm telling you right now, no, they didn't admit they were wrong. One of their lawyers did and was promptly fired for doing so. No, what do you mean? That's what I said. The administration's attorney accidentally, in a moment of honesty, admitted to a mistake. That was enough. That was the pivotal point. Do you understand? For years and years, I have been screaming from the mountaintops about Democrats doing exactly what Van Hollen should have been doing, okay? Or what Van Hollen has done. Make this an issue that people have to pay attention to. And the first moment that they seized on that opportunity, we are seeing changes occur. This is why I always stress the importance. This is why I always stress the importance of working with the allies we have that are in positions of power. Because Senator Chris Van Hollen is not, one of my favorite senators at all. He is not close to me ideologically at all. But he did the right thing in the right moment. He actually moved beyond platitudes. Okay? He moved beyond platitudes. And he forced people to pay attention. Because when you're a senator, you have this power. You have a bully pulpit, maybe not as vast and as large and as influential as the presidential one, but you still have a soapbox that you can utilize like this, especially if you personally go out there. Now, this doesn't mean that magically the situation will improve overnight. That's not what I'm saying at all. Okay? This is not going to magically change the deportation regime. And as I have said, they are actively, the Trump administration is actively moving to disparage Manuel Kilmar Garcia, in more dramatic ways, in more ridiculous ways. But this is a pivotal moment. This is an attitude shift. Trust me when I say this. It's just beginning. And more people within the margins are going to change their perspective on this issue. They are going to come out and speak out against this. I promise. especially since, where is it? This very moment right here is a pivotal one because it shows everyone that has been protesting that your anger and your protests do matter, that Democrats taking a principled stance matters. As I've said, they want to make Cecot the place where dissidents disappear without due process. We cannot let this happen. This is the first small battle in a much larger fight.
The Trump administration insists Abrego Garcia is a violent gang member.
Yeah, okay. And I'm going to tell you some of the most insane things that these guys have done, both Nayib Bukele and also the Trump administration has done so far to lie about this dude, okay? He's a first-year smart apprentice, okay? Sheet metal and transportation worker apprentice, okay? Like, this dude is a union member. He's a union brother. He has an American citizen wife and an American citizen son with special needs. And the way that they are disparaging him in an effort to justify this deportation is instructive, because they want to be able to get away with swaying the public opinion at a time when there is finally some pushback. They also don't want to show that they will cave and capitulate to any kind of pushback, no matter what. Has the union made a statement on this? Yes, the union has made plenty of statements on this, of course. His union was one of the first organizations that came out with a public statement. This is the opportunity not to celebrate, but instead to push even harder, as a matter of fact, to extend the conversation to the Mahmoud Khalil situation, to extend the conversation to Mosin, to extend the conversation to Rameza Öztürk. There are so many that are also being detained right now falsely, illegally, for a violation that the government is engaging in, an egregious violation that the government is engaging in, that is a direct violation of the First Amendment, the most important one. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And the government knows that these guys are simply being detained and possibly deported because of what they have done, what kind of exercising of the First Amendment they've engaged in, because they want this to be a way to open the conversation, a way to erode the First Amendment protections. First, for non-citizens that are legal permanent residents, like, documented immigrants that are on a pathway towards naturalization to begin with. Then they will move to recently naturalized citizens. Then they will inevitably move to natural-born citizens. Donald Trump is actively working on a deportation scheme for homegrown American natural-born U.S. citizens. I'm telling you right now, this is where it is headed. I have not been wrong so far, so heed my warnings. Okay? A lot of people are still kind of oblivious to the grand scheme here, the larger goals of this administration. They're trying to belittle Chris Van Hollen for the attempts and his achievement in this regard, and they're reaching for some of the most desperate they possibly can. Most of it is irrelevant to the point of contention, of course, but it's a way to basically engage in a war of attrition. It's very effective. No, it's not. It's only effective if you find yourself duped by any number of different things and you don't focus up on the main problem. And the media, luckily, has not caved into this, okay? The media hasn't thus far given into this. One thing that they also did was bring up the domestic civil, the domestic issues that Kilmar and his wife had, right? Immediately, they were like, see, he's a wife beater. He's a wife beater. It's like, bro, his wife is literally prominently on stage every day demanding his return. That doesn't make you question the things that you're going along. That doesn't make you question the things that you're presenting as like a reason to keep him in El Salvador. Not only did she file for a temporary restraining order, she never actually fulfilled the restraining order in any way. She never actually fulfilled the restraining order at all. She also had to give quotes to Newsweek about this, where she had to be like, "Listen, wait, I was really worried and I guess quote unquote jumped the gun when I filed for this out of caution because of my previous relationship that was abusive, and we worked through our problems." And I never actually filed I never actually went along with the restraining order in general. We went to marriage counseling, and we're in a loving relationship where I want my husband to come back to the United States of America. So the idea that this is enough for enough justification for deportation is silly on its face, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter at all. They're just desperately grabbing onto anything and everything they can do. The targets change, and they get increasingly pettier, increasingly more petty, and increasingly less consequential targets overall. But it's an act of desperation. This comes from the desperation that they recognize because they're losing. They're losing on the public front. People are starting to recognize what's going on. They're just grasping at straws. They're just trying to grab onto anything and everything they can.
When I first sat down with Kilmar, we just had glasses of water on the table. I think maybe some coffee. And as we were talking, one of the government people came over and deposited 2 other glasses on the table with ice, and I don't know if it was salt or sugar around the top, but they look like margaritas. And if you look at the one they put in front of Kilmar, it actually had a little less liquid than the one in front of me, to try to make it look, I assume, like he drank out of it. Let me just be very clear. Neither of us touched the drinks that were in front of us. And if you want to play a little Sherlock Holmes, I'll tell you how you can know that. So if you look at the video or the picture I sent out from the beginning of our meeting, you'll see there are no glasses on the table. So you'll see in later videos they are on the table. But they made a little mistake. Or some people are very careful, right?
This is bad Hasbara, exactly. They're doing Israel. It reminds me of a desperate but violent state that is actively trying to do anything and everything they can to disparage the people that they are torturing, okay? And those who demand an end to said torture.
If you sip out of one of those glasses, some of whatever it was, salt or sugar.
Additionally ironic because Nayib Bukele is Palestinian, by the way. I hate to recognize that, and I hate to admit that, but he is, he is probably the worst Palestinian on the planet, but...
would disappear. You would see a gap.
Yeah, people don't know that Nayib Bukele is literally Palestinian.
Nobody drank any margaritas or sugar water or whatever it is. But this is a lesson into the lengths that President Bukele will do to deceive people about what's going on. And it's also shows the lengths that the Trump administration and the president will go to, because when he was asked about a reporter about this, he just went along for the ride. So the White House and the president had been lying about this case from the beginning.
Yeah, look at this. Hey, Chris Van Hollen, I went ahead and changed your office plaque for you. Chris Van Hollen, senator from El Salvador. Oh my God, they're so stupid. That's the other thing. They're doing like a bunch of AI art to be like, oh, he wants to kiss and make out. He wants to make out with the MS-13 gang member. And these are like 65-year-old, 75-year-old adults, okay? No self-respect, no decency whatsoever. You want to know something that is hilarious about the knuckle tattoo situation? The ICE agents, if he truly had knuckle tattoos initially that suggested MS-13 gang affiliation, would have put that in the report. They wouldn't have run around for the past week or so. The defenders of this deportation regime wouldn't have been running around being like, well, he's wearing a Chicago Bulls hat, even though he lived in Maryland. Clearly, he's MS-13. They would have started off with that, don't you think? It was never even presented as evidence. MS-13 is super tatted up. Okay? If you're MS-13, you're tatted up. People don't necessarily hide that they're MS-13 affiliated. okay? The idea that like the Department of Homeland Security failed the precursory analysis of his tattoos for multiple years at this point, only to recognize them after the administration openly admitted that they wrongfully deported this man to El Salvador, after a previous immigration court judge said that he specifically is not MS-13 and is in threat. He is under threat by MS-13. If he were to be deported to El Salvador, he would most likely get killed. The idea that like all of those things happen, but magically now he has MS-13 knuckle tattoos is kind of ridiculous. Also, guess what, dude? Due process. This is why due process is a necessity. I know it has 300,000 likes on Twitter. It does not matter. The president can just lie about whatever the f he wants to, and people will just eat it up. Serious question. Since when has it been illegal to just be in a gang? That's actually a really good question. And it also shows that we have completely lost sight of how these things are supposed to be. You're not wrong. It is technically, and I know people will lose their minds when I say this, it's not illegal to be gang affiliated. Okay? It's entirely dependent on what your affiliation is. It's entirely dependent on what kind of investigation has been conducted and what kind of facilitation of gang activity that you've participated in. So yes, it is technically not even illegal to be in a gang, which is so crazy to say because when those words even come out of my mouth, okay? When those words even come out of my mouth, it's like it comes across like I'm living in a separate planet here. Like people will hear that and go, "What are you talking about?" Of course it is. No, it's not. It's illegal to do a crime. It's kind of a goofy point, to be fair. It's not. It's not even a goofy point. It's actually a very serious point. And the larger consideration here is how far we've moved the needle away from like what due process used to look like and what the criminal justice system used to look like. Now, this is just for the United States of America. Okay? And considering that there is now a vague terrorism designation for the MS-13 gang and Tren de Aragua, it doesn't even matter, obviously, especially because these are deportation proceedings. So there is a lower bar to clear. But the government has even lowered that bar further by claiming everyone is a terrorist without any due process whatsoever. So, we've if initially the argument was like, well, hold up. You could just say anyone and everyone is a gang member if you think that that's appropriate for any kind of criminal proceeding, you're wrong. To the government can say whoever they want is a terrorist, and there is no investigation in that process. There's no due process whatsoever, and they can just deport you. It is insane. Hell's Angels would be a great example of this, except the Trump administration likes Hell's Angels. They consider them to be a white gang. That's why the Trump movement in general will always be like, Hell's Angels are going to go to battle. They fantasize about the Hell's Angels like protecting America, not realizing that half Hell's Angels are also Latino, but that's besides the point. And they're not white at all. And they consider Hell's Angels to be an American gang, an honorable gang, a gang that's going to fight against Tren de Aragua. That's the fantasy. Remember when they were hallucinating about the Aurora, Colorado apartment complex situation, claiming that Tren de Aragua had overtaken a apartment complex. They were fantasizing about how Hell's Angels are moving into Aurora, Colorado to fight the Tren de Aragua gangs. Yeah, look.
And last night,
fact check, video does not show Hell's Angels riding to Colorado in August 2024.
8:45 p.m. here on the East Coast. I called
Hell's Angels on their way to Aurora, Colorado to help clean up the apartments being invaded by illegals from Valenzuela. Valenzuela, baby. Raise hell. Praise Dale. The difference is that they're white. No, they're not even. They're not even white. They're not even white.
Called Jennifer to tell her that I had met with Kilmar. And I told her what he said to me, which was first and foremost that he missed her and his family. And as he said that, you could see a tear go down his.
He looks back here, and she's on the other side, and the Republicans literally zoomed in on this to be like, he doesn't even know. He doesn't even know Kilmar Abrego Garcia's wife. He doesn't even know what she looks like. This is all a sham. And they cut it before he actually found her in the background. Like, I saw so many clips, dude. Please let this go. He is a gang member, not a U.S. citizen. Move on to better things like Free Luigi the American. Wait, what? Why did the inner city press say he moved to Santa Ana? Please let this go. He is not a citizen. There are bigger things to fight for. For example, fight for justice for Luigi, not an illegal gang member. Like this makes me want to quit on the spot. I swear to God, dude. Land back, land back, land back. Land back, though. Land back. I swear to God. I don't even know what's going on here. What about Native American people? This citizenship talk is so juvenile. Native Americans are only birthright citizens. His ancestors walked into this land and got citizenship that way. What a clown. Chatter. I feel like you need to go back to the bot farm that you came from. Hey guys, not a federal agent here. Definitely just a liberal. I love screaming land back and then turning around and being like, immigrants should be falsely smeared as terrorists and I will believe them, and simultaneously demand, like, how can you be like pro Native American rights and demand land back while simultaneously being like, and Kilmar Abrego Garcia should be executed in Cecot? Like, do you think we couldn't see your previous takes in the chat? What's going on here? The justification for wiping out your great grandparents were identical to the justifications that you are recirculating in this chat. That this person has no right to be here. This person is violent. This person has done violence. He's a gang member. It is a modernized version of the manifest destiny white nativist arguments made. This is the tragic irony that you fail to comprehend. The very same people, the very same groups, and the very same ideology that called your ancestors savages that must be purged from this land that will belong to the Anglo-Saxon Protestants are the very same groups now saying the exact same thing. It's the same it's the same ideology. And it is not just Kilmar Abrego Garcia that is falsely deported. The reason why we are talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia is because out of the 90% of all people that have been deported to Cecot thus far that have no criminal record whatsoever, he was the only one that the federal government accidentally admitted a mistaken deportation on. He literally said, or the federal government's immigration attorney accidentally revealed in a moment of honesty that they had f***ed up. That's it. That is why this is a story. The reason why this is a story, despite the fact that it is simply the tip of the iceberg, okay? The reason why this is a story, in spite of the fact that it's only the tip of the iceberg, is because of that reason. Because it's such an obvious error, and it's so cruel and so uniquely unjustifiable that even Democrats are basically running on with this and actively campaigning against it. I don't have much knowledge about Bukele, but he seems to be quite popular within El Salvador. Why do we have a problem with him? Genuinely curious. I'm not very knowledgeable about the issue. He is very popular in El Salvador, at least for now. Okay? But you know who's very popular despite being a belligerent right-wing monster? Donald Trump. His popularity has only seemingly started to wane as of the last month or so, even though he's done like horrible things, and that's barely put a dent in his popularity, his approval ratings. Popularity in this case does not necessarily mean it's right. I mean, Hitler was popular with the Germans. Franco was popular. Donald Trump is popular. Vladimir Putin is popular. This doesn't mean that they're correct. The Cecot facility is such a horrible facility that even the American government acknowledges its atrocities, the atrocious conditions. I would go so far as to say that the Trump administration is using Cecot specifically for that purpose as well, because it is a horrible, like, it's a prison that has worse conditions than the American prisons. It is a concentration camp. They're using multiple different court battles at the same time and trying to see how far they can take this, basically stress testing the system and what remains of the institutional control, what remains of the separation of powers, in an effort to write new rules, create new precedents, so they can legally, in air quotes, create this deportation regime. It's on the one hand, with the likes of Mahmoud Khalil, they're looking at basically taking away people's green card and legal permanent residency for the crime of their free speech. They want to criminalize free speech to the best of their ability for non-citizens first, documented legal permanent residents first, and then they will inevitably move to recently naturalized citizens. Then they'll inevitably move to naturalized citizens across the board. Then they'll inevitably move to natural-born U.S. citizens. These are things that the Trump administration has actively talked about. Okay? They also simultaneously need to erode due process. And if the courts respond to that, they need to violate court orders. They want to destroy the persuasive power that the highest court in the United States of America has, completely eviscerating the separation of powers so that no one can stand in their way. Part of that also means you have to eliminate dissent and any sort of legal battles that you might see. And a way to do that is to go to all of the largest law firms in the country and actively target them to make sure that they play ball, so that any law firm that has federal that works in the federal court system cannot go into federal property. That's a thing that the Trump administration did. And I don't want to say quietly did that. They openly did it, right? With an executive order. When I say they're grasping at any straw they can, this is what I mean. Look at this. 57,000 likes, bro.
You did take out a temporary order of protection against your husband in 2021. Were you in fear of your husband?
My husband is alive. That's all I can say.
Okay, and I'm not going to push on that, apparently.
There's massive delay, and she's barely picking up what he's putting down the entire time from the start of the interview. But if you cut it for the in a beautifully cut 24-second clip, if you clip it out of context, without ever considering why she would literally demand the return, like, the question in and of itself is you might think the question in and of itself is stupid. You might think the question in and of itself is stupid. It's not. The reason why he's asking that question is because he wants her to respond to it to counter the narrative that's out there. Okay? That's the reason why he's asking that question. Because everyone is claiming that this is this guy's a wife beater or whatever. And it's ridiculous because she has already given numerous quotes on this. In a Newsweek exclusive, she talked about it a couple days ago when Newsweek reached out to her originally about the administration releasing this restraining order that she had filed. And so her having this back and forth here and not really understanding what he's saying because of, I assume, audio issues and the delay, as you can see in all of her answers, was enough for the End Wokeness account to blast this and to make it seem like this woman, who is, for the past couple of weeks, actively and prominently demanding the return of her husband, actually is secretly excited that her husband was deported because he is a wife beater, a domestic abuser. If she was excited that he was deported, don't you think that she would at least not say anything about it? Why would she be even entertaining these interviews? Why would she even go out? If she was like, yeah, this is a bad guy and a gang member and a wife beater to put the cherry on top, why is she like, yeah, this bad guy who's a gang member who's also beating me all the time, I want him to come back? Like, she misunderstood the question. I think he was like, are you in fear of your husband's conditions? Because it doesn't make sense how she responded to it. And ABC News itself, I guess, added context to her answers here. But here, this is it. This is what I was talking about. Exclusive. Abrego Garcia's wife responds after a restraining order revealed. In an exclusive statement in Newsweek, Vazquez Sura responded to the DHS release of court filings. Okay. The documents included her 2021 request for a protective order in which she accused her husband of punching and scratching her, ripping her shirt, and leaving her bruised. Temporary order barred Abrego Garcia from contacting her and directed him not to harass or abuse her, according to the filings. This was in 2021. So why is she in 2025 demanding the return of this supposedly abusive person? Well, here's what the reasoning was. After surviving domestic abuse violence in a previous relationship, I acted out of caution following a disagreement with Kilmar by seeking a civil protective order in case things escalated. Things did not escalate, and I decided not to follow through with the civil court process. We were able to work through the situation privately as a family, including by going to counseling. Our marriage only grew stronger in the years that followed. No one is perfect, and no marriage is perfect, but that is not a justification for ICE's action of abducting him and deporting him to a country where he was supposed to be protected from removal. Kilmar has always been a loving partner and a father, and I will continue to stand by him and demand justice for him, the statement adds. So why is it that nobody cares about this and they're grasping at straws? It's because they want to create propaganda surrounding the issue. Okay? They want to create propaganda. They want to fight on numerous fronts, flood the market with as much misinformation as possible so that they can justify the administration's actions after the fact. The tattoos, the hand tattoos, knuckle tattoos, play the exact same role. The knuckle tattoos were so insignificant, so inconsequential that they were never once revealed in any of the numerous times that Abrego Garcia has gone through the court process, through the immigration court process. Do you understand? And it's the same as the rolls of money. Remember, Pam Bondi, the attorney general, and the administration came out and said that they found him with rolls of money when they actually detained him. It turns out he did not have rolls of money on him at all, as a matter of fact, but instead they misread the detention report that stated that he was wearing a hoodie that had rolls of money with wings on it. I'm telling you, dude, this only happened because Van Hollen pressed hard and because you guys protested against this. Now, imagine if more Congress members would also demonstrate the same moral courage against the false deportation proceedings for people who have done nothing wrong but simply said mean things. Conservatives that kept crying over and over and over again about free speech in 1984 and how lib want to ban the truth or whatever are straight up watching this unfold. This has to happen. Similar things to what Van Hollen is doing has to take place with Rumeysa Öztürk, with Mosin, with Mahmoud, with all of the people that are being detained right now, because they participated in student protests against Israel's genocide. And seeing that this kind of action actually has, still at this stage has a reaction from other parties involved where people do actually back down a little bit and concede a little bit. All it takes is for some politicians to demonstrate bravery. It's right there for the taking.
Everybody in this country, even those undocumented immigrants, have rights, but are you concerned about standing so forcefully with somebody that has at least a questionable record.
I am not defending the man. I'm defending the rights of this man.
Wait, oh God, come on, Van Hollen. The easiest response to this is his wife called my office. His wife is my constituent. She's the one who wants his return. That's it. It's that simple. This is nothing but a distraction to try to post hoc rationalize this false deportation that should not have happened to begin with by this administration, led by wife abusers and drunk rapists. What are we talking about?
To due process. And the Trump administration has admitted in court that he was wrongfully detained and wrongfully deported.
This answer right here is kind of lame, I'll be honest. And I really like what Van Hollen has done so far, but there's still obviously like a limit to how hard he can go. But I think there's no reason to entertain it. There's not even any reason to entertain this whatsoever. I think that his staffers should arm him better with better talking points on this issue. So now Hasanabi are completely ignoring the fact that his own wife got a protective order on him. Oh my God, this Native American lady is back. If this was a good man, I would get it. But why is there such a defense of non-Americans? I do not get it. Because the idea, first of all, you're in the community of a person who came here when they were 18 years old, okay? You tune in live to a person who luckily has birthright citizenship as a consequence of being an anchor baby. But having said that, don't you think that I would have a different perspective, a different framework that I'm operating off of, and the notion that like anyone that comes here is automatically a bad person or automatically should not be on U.S. soil is a ridiculous statement to present to a person who very clearly wants and has no issue with migrants coming into this country? That's number one. Number two, I ask you this question, and I hope you can understand it. Okay, he came here legally. I'm from legal migration. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. First of all, he was legally present in the United States of America. He was literally a union member as well. He had gainful employment. So you're wrong. He has a wife that is an American citizen. He has children that are American citizens. He was de facto legally on U.S. soil, especially after he got a court, an immigration court, to stop him from being deported to El Salvador, his nation of origin. Okay? That's number one. Number two, if you think, aside from the fact that he came here illegally, which is what you keep repeating, actually, it said that he crossed the border at 16. Wait, what? This person, first of all, let me just explain something to you, okay? You know how natives will say no one is illegal on stolen land? I don't know if you've heard this statement before. I don't know if you've ever internalized it or if you ever thought about it, but I think it's a pretty valid assessment to make. Not only that, but also, this is only an issue if people that are coming in to the United States of America are actually causing issues, okay? Like real issues. If I'll hand it to you, okay? I'll help you understand this. If what Donald Trump said about undocumented migrants was true, the fact that undocumented migrants seemingly from all around the world are coming into the United States of America with one goal in mind, which is to undermine America and do rapes and mass murders, and they're killing 100,000 Americans every year, then yes, mass deportation would be valid, okay? That would be an invasion. Except that's not what's going on. That is completely made up. Okay? That's it. This is the problem. At the heart of the problem lies a severe sequence of lies that you believe in. Asylum applications are a legal and valid form. And in order to process an asylum application, you need to be inside of U.S. borders to begin with. Many of the people that you think are undocumented migrants or illegal aliens are simply applying for asylum. That's number one. Number two, this person already had a withholding of removal, which means that he was a He was legally on U.S. soil at that point, okay? I'm going to take two different steps here to explain something to you. One, there are a sequence of unjustifiable laws, okay? Completely ridiculous laws. For example, being Jewish was illegal in Nazi Germany. Would you say, don't break the law, don't be Jewish? No, you wouldn't. For example, freeing slaves was illegal at a certain point in this country. Would you say, don't free slaves? What do you mean? The law's the law. That is an idiotic argument. Legality and morality are two separate concepts. You should be an adult and be able to figure out that there is a difference between the two, okay? And that one trumps over the other. That's number one. Number two, in this circumstance, and in many cases when people are talking about someone being an illegal alien, those people already have the proper documentation and the proper clearance from the government to be here, to work here. They're just simply saying that they're illegal aliens, okay? A withholding of removal to where your nation of origin is a higher standard and clear than even an asylum application. It is a de facto legal allowance to be on U.S. soil unless you do something that is completely heinous, okay?
As to his wife is the one who is asking us all to bring him home so his rights can be respected.
Okay, he came back around to that point, so I'm happy that he did.
And in fact, even if he is a gang member, that doesn't mean you don't have rights, due process rights.
Well, exactly. But again, the place to litigate that.
This is also good as well. This statement in and of itself is also one that should be repeated too. Even having gang associations is not automatically illegal. We're so far removed from that part of the conversation because the needle has so firmly planted in the most reactionary position at this point where everyone is trying to fight any battle they can at the edge. Like people are like, hey, can we get due process again, please? Meanwhile, we've forgotten like that there are 11 other steps even before this point that are also completely unconscionable and completely ridiculous.
Is in the courts, and they've not put the evidence before the judge in the case.
Whenever people say there's a legal way to come into the country, they, one, completely refuse to recognize that his status in this country was legal de facto, okay? It was de facto legally in the country. He had a work authorization. And number two, the legal pathways of entry into the country in terms of getting immigration status are shut off to people like this, okay? Nobody is trekking 2,000 miles across treacherous terrain, braving the elements, and coming in here for fun, okay? They're not taking the hard route because they're all a bunch of YouTubers and TikTokers who wanted to do the crossing the border challenge, okay? They're doing this because the legal pathways are deliberately shut off to them. These are incredibly desperate people who don't want to do crimes, and that also is demonstrated by the criminality and the crime statistics of undocumented migrants in comparison to natural-born U.S. citizens. Undocumented migrants are responsible for lower crime per capita than U.S.-born citizens are by a wide margin. If legal pathways of citizenship or legal pathways of entry was allowed, was easily accessible, they would do it. Many of you have no idea how long it takes. Many of you have no idea how expensive it is. That is by design. That is specifically designed that way so that this country's capital owners can have a steady crop of expendable, disposable, permanent underclass, non-legally protected migrant workers. That's it. That is the only reason. The currency exchange alone would already create an unfair dynamic without any sort of wage parity legislation for migrant workers as opposed to domestic U.S. workers. So even without that, there would already be a depressive factor in play here for people if they came in legally, because of the fact that their material conditions are very different in their home countries. And they would come here and work for much lower prices than the U.S.-born domestic laborer would work for. But we don't even want to do that. We want slavery with extra steps, pennies on the dollar, disposable people that we can work in our agriculture, the disposable people that we can work in our construction. It is one of the most inhumane things that we do on a regular basis. It is by design. The cruelty is baked into the system. 90% of people that were sent to the Cecot facility thus far have no criminal background. None whatsoever. And have been shipped there to the slave labor colony exclusively because some ICE agent knew that they were easy pickings. In order to make it seem like there is a mass mobilization happening against all migrants, they're going after the ones that have basically told the government exactly where they're at. That's why they're going after student visa recipients and demanding that college campuses reveal any kind of misconduct that their foreign students have engaged in, because they want to pad them stats. Because lo and behold, and this might come as a surprise, the previous administration, regardless of what Trump said, and every administration, as a matter of fact, has, of course, criminally prosecuted migrants when they do crimes. Contrary to what the Trump administration was claiming before the election. That's the reason why they can't find these rugged, crazy criminals and are simply trying to deport whoever they can. Make no mistake. Yeah, in Trump's first term, ICE returned a man to the U.S. after deporting him to Iraq in a contravention of U.S. federal court order. They did it before, they can do it again. But this is just one instance. Previous administrations have also demanded the return from El Salvador too. The idea that this is impossible is ridiculous.
In your words, this is a screw up. I mean, are you concerned that more mistakes could happen?
Well, sure. None of us want mistakes. Mistakes bad. Doing it right, good.
Yeah.
But it was a screw up, and I understand why the administration is bowed up and said we won't admit it's a mistake, because if they do, they'll have their throats torn out. But it was a screw up. I don't see any pattern here. I've been listening to my Democratic friends say for, I don't know, since God was a child, that Trump is a threat to democracy. I don't see any pattern here. I see a screw up.
Well, and the concern for
the very fact that even John Kennedy has to concede that this is a mistake, but it's not a pattern, is a concession. It means that the pressure point, the pressure is working. Okay? I'm telling you right now, there is finally a little bit of a vibe shift that's taking place. For the record, he's still lying. He's just trying to hold on to the rest of the deportations. He's like, well, this one was a mistake, but the other ones are valid. They're not. 90% of the people that were shipped off were not, they didn't have a criminal record, dude. Abrego Garcia is simply the tip of the iceberg. And the only reason why we're talking about Abrego Garcia is because the government admitted to making this mistake. That's it. Are you using 90% of the hyperbole or fact? It's a fact. This is why I think the media is still bad and still needs to be pushed on this. Make no mistake. Right here, this anchor is supposed to turn around and say, ProPublica reporting on the matter showed 75% have no criminal record whatsoever, and 90% have, beyond the 75%, 15% of them have like jaywalking tickets like that, parking tickets. Like, she should say that. She should turn around and be like, the only reason why this is the news right now. The only reason why you're on the news and saying this and admitting to the wrongdoing by the government here is because the government actually admitted to the mistake. To say that this is not a pattern of behavior, this doesn't show a pattern of behavior, is completely ridiculous.